You've been holding on too tightly, to people, to outcomes, to versions of yourself that no longer exist. They told you happiness comes from having more, from love that stays forever, from plans that go your way, from control. But if that were true, why do you still feel heavy, even when life looks good? Why does your mind keep spinning at night, searching, gripping, afraid to let go? The truth? What you're really looking for isn't more, it's release. Release from the past, release from fear, release from the pressure to always hold it all together. And that's where Buddhist wisdom begins, not with gaining, but with unclenching. For thousands of years, the Buddha didn't promise riches or power. He offered something deeper, freedom from suffering. Not by escaping life, but by changing how we meet it. Not by numbing, but by seeing clearly. Tonight, as you lie here, something will soften. You'll start to notice the breath you forgot you were holding, the tension in your body letting go, the thoughts that once felt urgent beginning to pass like clouds. You don't need to chase peace anymore. It's been within you all along, quiet, steady, waiting for your return. This isn't just another bedtime audio. This is the beginning of your unbecoming, of peeling back every layer that isn't really you, of falling asleep not with worry but with wisdom. You've held on long enough. Now, it's time to let go. Are you ready? Let's begin. And now, with your eyes growing heavier and your breath beginning to slow, we gently step into the first truth, the one most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The one hidden behind every sleepless night, every restless scroll through things we don't need, and every moment we mistake possession for peace. We begin with what we think we own. It starts so quietly. A favorite shirt, a new phone, the first car, a room of your own. Slowly, the things around you stop being just things. They become extensions of who you believe you are. Your identity starts to attach to them, and in that subtle shift, suffering finds its first open door. When you cling to something, there's fear buried underneath. Fear it might get lost, broken, taken. And so even in moments when you have everything, there's a whisper in your chest that says, what if it disappears? That whisper never stops, because deep down you know the truth. It will disappear. Everything does. The Buddha called this illusion anattati, truth, that there is no fixed, permanent self to attach to anything. Not a self that owns, not a self that holds, not even a self that can be found. But the mind doesn't like that. The mind wants to believe, this is mine, this defines me, this proves I exist. So we keep building identities through what we own. My house, my career, my body, my image, my success. And the more we build, the more fragile we become. Because now, peace isn't in ute, it's in the hands of everything that can be lost. The couch gets stained, the phone breaks, the body changes, the money comes and goes, and with every loss, the false self trembles. Because when what you own disappears, who are you without it? You start to see how tiring this is, how heavy it becomes to live a life constantly defending things that were never really yours to begin with. Not truly, not permanently. And this isn't about becoming numb. It's not about throwing everything away or pretending things don't matter. It's about seeing clearly, seeing that clinging turns neutral objects into anxiety traps. Seeing that protecting your possessions can often cost you your presence, and that every time you say, I am this, or this is mine, you're building a cage around a self that was never solid to begin with. Look at how much time is spent maintaining the illusion, cleaning, upgrading, collecting, comparing. The hunger for more doesn't come from need, it comes from fear. Fear of being less. Fear of being left behind. Fear of disappearing if you don't have something to show for your life. But what if your value isn't measured by what you hold, but by what you're free enough to let go of. Think of a time you lost something important to you. Maybe it was sudden, maybe it slipped away slowly. The first reaction is usually panic, then sadness, then a strange silence. But in that silence, there's often something else: relief. Not because you didn't care, but because the pressure of holding on finally cracked open. Attachment is pressure, and pressure weighs on the mind like a constant storm in the background. You don't always notice it until it's gone. People will tell you it's wise to accumulate, build assets, collect things, have something to fall back on. And in some practical sense, that's understandable. But what they don't tell you is that the more you gather, the more you start to believe you are the gathering. And that's the trap. Because when you mistake what you have for what you are, you hand your peace over to everything that can be taken, and the world takes. A house can burn down, a savings account can vanish, a treasured object can break, a reputation can be shattered in a single misunderstanding. That's not negative thinking, that's just life. The question is, when the breaking happens, are you broken with it? Or can you stand in the middle of the ruins and remember you were never the house, you were never the job, you were never the things? This truth isn't meant to make you sad, it's meant to set you free. Because in the absence of attachment, there is space, spaciousness of mind, lightness of being, and that space is where peace lives. Not in control, not in holding, but in the absence of needing anything to define you. Think about the objects that define modern identity: phones, clothes, photos, status symbols. These things aren't evil, but when they become your emotional anchors, every scratch feels personal. Every change feels like a threat, and slowly you forget how to exist without reinforcement from the outside. Now, hear this gently: you were never meant to be owned by your own possessions. And yes, owned, because that's what clinging does. It reverses the roles. The things you think you own begin to own your time, your thoughts, your moods. You can spend days upset over a lost item. You can skip a sunset worrying about a car repair. You can miss the present moment while scrolling for more things to buy. But in the end, the real loss isn't the object. It's you. You lose your stillness, your joy, your clarity, all to keep up a story of ownership that was never real. The teaching of anatta isn't abstract. It's not a puzzle to solve with your intellect. It's a lens to see through. It reminds you that there is no permanent you that possesses anything. What you call you is just a stream of thoughts, sensations and feelings flowing through awareness. And what you call mine is just form, impermanent, unstable, empty of essence. That doesn't make life meaningless. It makes life precious. Because when you stop gripping, you start appreciating, truly, not in the fearful way that says, I better hold on tighter, but in the open-hearted way that says, thank you for passing through my life, even if only for a moment. There's a difference between using and clinging, between enjoying and needing, between owning and being enslaved. Buddhism teaches that liberation begins not when you get everything, but when you stop needing everything to be yours. So how do you begin to release the grip? Start by noticing. Every time you feel tension in the mind around a thing, pause. Ask yourself gently, what am I afraid of losing here? What would I be without this? Don't rush to answer. Let the question work on you. Let it unravel what feels solid. And then, look closer. Notice how every object in your life has a story attached to it. This is my favorite. This was expensive. This reminds me of them. Those stories aren't wrong. But are they making you free? Try this. Hold something you treasure and let the thought come. This is not mine. It never was. It is only visiting. See what happens in your body. See if a little bit of tightness lets go. It might feel strange at first, like you're betraying something, but what you're really doing is telling the truth that everything you touch will pass, that your job isn't to trap it, but to bless it while it's here. When that understanding begins to root itself in your heart, you start to move differently. You still buy things, use things, love things, but they don't bind you anymore. They don't define you. You stop being afraid of losing them because your center has shifted inward. You find beauty in simplicity, joy in moments, peace in impermanence. And that peace is no longer conditional, no longer fragile, because it doesn't depend on how much you own but on how free your mind is. You may start to notice something subtle but profound. The more you let go of, the more room you have for presence. The room you were trying to fill with decorations suddenly feels more sacred with space. The shelf with fewer objects becomes a place of rest for the eyes. The closet you cleared out becomes a doorway to ease. And it's not just about physical clutter. It's about the mind unclenching. The constant tracking of things quiets down. The comparing fades. The need to prove starts to dissolve. Without knowing it, you begin to return to your natural state, still, spacious, enough. This is the path of inner simplicity, not from denial, but from wisdom. A wisdom that says, you are not your things, you are not your image, you are not the weight of your belongings or the sum of your trophies. You are awareness itself. You are the one who sees it all come and go. And in that seeing, there is no fear, no panic, no need to hold. Just peace. A peace that cannot be bought, broken, stolen, or lost. That's what begins to rise when you stop clinging. That's what comes alive in the emptiness of ownership. A stillness that's always been there waiting underneath the weight. And now, as your thoughts begin to settle, you may feel it something gentle in the center of your chest. A quiet knowing. A truth that doesn't scream, but whispers. You are not what you own. You never were. And in that knowing, you are free. And even when the mind has let go of things, the car, the house, the title, the image, it still clings in a subtler way. Not to objects now, but to outcomes, to how life should unfold, to what should happen next. You can stop needing to own anything and still suffer if you continue to believe that your happiness depends on results going your way. There's this quiet expectation that life should reward effort, that love should be returned, that plans should work out, that doing everything right should lead to ease. But that belief, though comforting, is where suffering begins. It hides in everyday language. I'll be happy when, I'll relax if, it will all be worth it once. These statements seem innocent, but they all carry the same trap, tying your peace to something outside of you, waiting for life to meet your conditions before you allow yourself to feel okay. And when that condition isn't met, the ground slips. That's the suffering the Buddha called dukkha, not just pain, but a deeper kind of friction. The sense that something isn't right, that something is always slightly off, that life is missing the mark. Because even if you get the thing, win the promotion, get the relationship, hit the goal, how long does the joy last? A moment? A day? Then comes the next craving, the next measurement, the next outcome to chase. Conditional happiness is unstable. It's like building a house on sand. Every high is followed by a low. Every success comes with the pressure to protect it or repeat it. You're constantly one step away from loss, one disappointment from collapse. This isn't failure. This is how most people live, and it's exhausting. The teachings don't say don't try, or don't care, or don't engage with the world. They say be free within it. They offer an alternative to chasing outcomes, a steadiness called upekkha, or equanimity. Equanimity isn't indifference. It's not about being cold or detached. It's deep balance, the kind that remains intact whether the news is good or bad, whether the moment feels easy or hard. It's the inner stability of someone who no longer places their joy on the roller coaster of conditions. Think of a tree rooted deeply in the earth. The wind may move the leaves, the storms may shake the branches, but the trunk stays grounded. Equanimity is that inner root. It holds you steady even when life changes course. And life always changes course. Most people mistake results for reality. They think, if I succeed, I'm worthy. If I fail, I'm not. If they like me, I'm lovable. If they don't, I'm broken. But all of these are just interpretations, just stories the mind tells itself. The truth is, outcomes don't determine your value. Outcomes don't define who you are. They simply happen, or they don't. What defines you is how deeply you stay present, even when life refuses to meet your expectations. We've been taught to grip tightly to what we want, but Buddhist practice teaches the opposite: hold everything loosely. Do your part. Act with sincerity, then let go. Not let go as in give up. Let go as in stop needing the result to be a certain way in order to be at peace. You can send the message without needing the reply. You can apply for the job without being shattered if you don't get it. You can love someone fully without being crushed if the relationship changes form. When happiness depends on outcome, it becomes fragile. When happiness arises from within, it becomes unshakable. Equanimity doesn't mean you don't feel. It means your feelings are no longer held hostage by what life does or doesn't give you. You feel fully, but you remain free. This freedom starts with seeing clearly, seeing the nature of outcomes for what they are: impermanent, unpredictable, not fully in your control. Even when you work hard, plan well, and try your best, life still unfolds in ways you didn't expect. Sometimes in your favor, sometimes not. That's not failure. That's just the truth of how things are. And when you begin to live from that truth, the anxiety starts to fade. The grip begins to loosen. The need to manipulate every moment into something perfect loses its urgency. You stop arguing with reality. You start dancing with it. This doesn't make you passive. In fact, it makes you more powerful, because your energy is no longer wasted on fear or control. It's directed toward what you can do, showing up fully, acting with clarity, and releasing the rest. That release isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Equanimity protects your heart from the wild swings of praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. These are the 8 worldly winds the Buddha spoke of. They blow through every life. No one escapes them, but you can stop being blown away. You start to witness the highs and lows like waves. You ride them, you don't become them. The reason this is so hard is because we're wired to crave certainty. The mind wants reassurance. It wants control. It believes, if I just do this right, I'll get the outcome I deserve. But life isn't transactional. It's not a vending machine where you press a button and always get what you ordered. Sometimes you give everything and still lose. Sometimes you make a mistake and everything works out. That doesn't mean effort is useless. It means effort is sacred only when it's not chained to reward. When effort is tied to outcome, it breeds anxiety. When effort is tied to values, it becomes freedom. Act because it aligns with who you want to be, not because it guarantees a return. Love because love itself is a gift, not because you expect it back. Give because generosity nourishes your spirit, not because it builds your image. This shift from outcome to presence is radical. It takes practice. You'll forget. You'll slip back into old habits of measuring success by results. That's okay. Every time you return, you grow stronger. Equanimity is a muscle. It builds slowly, moment by moment, choice by choice. You can start with small things: a delayed response to a text, a meeting that doesn't go your way, an idea that's misunderstood. Feel the tightness that wants to react. Pause, breathe, stay. Let the moment be what it is. Notice the part of you that wants to fix it, control it, change it. Instead, practice the discipline of rest, of trust, of letting go without collapse. You'll find that underneath the disappointment is a stillness, a presence that doesn't need anything extra. That presence is your natural state. It doesn't disappear when things don't go your way. It just gets covered by reaction. When you stop tying joy to the next achievement, the next validation, the next victory, you become steady. And in that steadiness, you can do great things. Not because you're desperate to prove something, but because your action flows from clarity, from groundedness, from purpose. Upekkha doesn't erase your preferences. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're not controlled by what happens next. Your mind becomes less of a battlefield, more of a sanctuary. You begin to trust life, not because it always gives you what you want, but because you no longer demand that it does. This trust creates a spaciousness. You breathe easier, you think more clearly, you respond instead of react. You begin to feel like the sky vast, open, unchanged by the passing clouds. Every meditation, every mindful breath, every letting go builds this space. The more you release your need for the future to look a certain way, the more the present becomes enough. And when the present is enough, you're finally free. Because the deepest suffering doesn't come from what we experience. It comes from believing that something else should be happening instead. That's the root. And that's what equanimity dissolves. You no longer live with a clenched fist around each hope. You begin to walk with open hands, not empty open. This openness is where resilience lives. It's what lets you meet heartbreak without shutting down, face uncertainty without panic, start again without bitterness. And what's more beautiful is that this openness spreads. People feel it around you. Your presence becomes grounding for others. Your calm becomes a mirror that reflects their own potential to be still. You become less reactive, less rigid, less pulled by highs and lows. And as you grow, so does your capacity for compassion. Because when you're no longer caught in your own chaos, you can hold space for others with love and not judgment. Equanimity is what makes kindness sustainable. It keeps you from burning out, from turning bitter, from collapsing under the weight of expectations. It teaches you to care deeply, but without needing to control. And in that space, a new kind of joy begins to bloom, one that isn't dependent on the weather of life, one that can hold both sunlight and storm with the same open heart. This is the joy that no success can buy and no failure can take. This is the joy of being at peace, not because everything is perfect, but because your peace is no longer at the mercy of perfection. This is the joy of someone who is no longer waiting to be whole. And as the night deepens and your breath continues to slow, let this truth sink in gently. You don't have to keep chasing peace. You only have to stop tying it to something that can be lost. You've done enough. You are enough. And right here, without needing to change a single thing, you can rest. Free. And when you stop tying your peace to what happens, when joy no longer rises and falls with outcomes, there's something else that starts to rise in its place. A quiet pull toward less life, but less clutter, less noise, less of what never truly brought you peace in the first place. You start to feel the weight of excess, the tension of too many choices, the subtle chaos of having too much of everything and not enough of what matters. There is a kind of silence that begins to call you. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of mental overload. This is where spiritual minimalism begins. Not in empty rooms or colorless walls, but in the internal act of removing what doesn't belong. the subtracting of everything that covers your clarity, your calm, your natural state of ease. In a world that teaches us to accumulate, the Dharma whispers a different truth. Freedom doesn't come from adding more, it comes from letting go, not just of physical things, but of inner weight, attachments, reactions, false needs. Minimalism, when practiced from the heart, is not just about space, it's about presence. It's about choosing what stays in your life with so much care that what's left becomes sacred. There's no pressure to live with less for the sake of appearance. What matters is how deeply what remains supports your peace. The Buddha lived simply, not as a rejection of the world, but as a full embrace of what really mattered. He understood that every object carried a pull, a possibility of desire, of grasping, of becoming lost in thought. By having little, he could give everything. His simplicity wasn't deprivation, it was precision. And that's the shift this path invites. Not forced austerity, but clarity. To start noticing what brings friction, what weighs down your attention, what pulls your energy into constant maintenance. The practice begins with awareness, sitting quietly and asking, what am I constantly managing? What do I keep around, not because it serves me, but because I'm afraid to let it go? There's a kind of emotional inventory that unfolds. The shirt that no longer fits but carries a memory, the account you scroll without joy, the plan that no longer feels right but keeps you in motion. All of it becomes a mirror reflecting the state of your mind. When you begin to simplify from the inside, you notice a pattern. The less you carry, the more clearly you can feel. The less you own, the more room there is to breathe. The fewer roles you perform, the closer you get to who you really are. Spiritual minimalism asks you to choose peace over clutter, stillness over stimulation, clarity over chaos. Not just in your home, but in your conversations, in your calendar, in your inner dialogue. And the power in this isn't just quiet, it's transformative, because what you remove reveals what you were too distracted to see. Silence brings clarity, emptiness brings insight, stillness uncovers truth. This path doesn't promise ease at first. Letting go brings discomfort. There's a strange ache in surrendering things you once believed you needed, but that ache doesn't last. And beyond it is a lightness that cannot be manufactured. You begin to learn the difference between what is useful and what is simply familiar, between what is meaningful and what is just decoration, between what is truly nourishing and what only numbs. Even attention becomes precious. You realize that every moment you give away to distraction is a moment you cannot get back. So you begin to guard your kimono with hardness, but with reverence. You no longer say yes to everything. You let the quiet speak before the impulse replies. You notice the habits that fill space, but not your soul. The patterns that feel productive, but leave you empty. And it's not about doing nothing. It's about doing the right things with full presence. Cutting through the noise so your actions become pure, focused, alive. This is the elegance of subtraction, not loss but refinement. Spiritual minimalism also helps release the false sense of importance we place on busyness. You begin to see that constantly being in motion is not the same as being alive. That chasing 10 things at once often leads you further away from the one thing that truly matters. So you slow down, not to escape, but to feel, to notice the subtle details of now, the warmth in your chest when you rest, the steadiness in your breath when you don't rush, the way silence is not empty, but full of presence. You start to unlearn the craving for more, not because more is bad, but because more is never enough when it comes from lack. You see that peace doesn't come from the next thing, it comes from the absence of need. Even thought becomes part of this clearing. You notice how much of your mental space is occupied by planning, judging, rehashing, so you start to release stories that no longer help, assumptions that no longer heal. You leave room for not knowing, for resting in the space between answers. This emptiness is not a void, it's a sanctuary. In this space, you stop needing to define yourself with achievements. You stop measuring your worth by what you produce. You stop believing that success means constant accumulation. You begin to feel that the more you remove, the closer you get to something sacred, not something outside of you, something you've carried all along, but couldn't hear over the noise. Even speech becomes more intentional. You don't talk just to fill silence. You listen, you pause, you speak when it matters, and your words begin to carry more weight, more heart, more clarity. Relationships become simpler too, not shallow real. You let go of performative connection. You let go of obligations rooted in guilt. You make room for people who bring stillness, not drama. Love that calms, not love that burns. And with this, you stop fearing solitude, because now you're no longer surrounded by things that echo your loneliness. You are full with your own presence. You find depth in your own company. Spiritual minimalism isn't a rule, it's a return to what was always true before the world convinced you otherwise. It allows joy to arise from simple things: a clean room, a single warm meal, a quiet morning. You stop needing more because you finally feel the fullness of enough. And this feeling, it's not something you chase. It grows quietly in the space you make for it. The more you let go, the more clearly it reveals itself. You also begin to trust that what's meant for you doesn't need to be held so tightly. You don't cling out of fear. You open your hands, and what stays, stays. What goes, goes. Your peace is no longer tied to keeping. And in this simplicity, a profound gratitude awakens, because now everything is seen, the smallest gestures, the ordinary moments. The things you used to rush past are now the very things that soften your heart. You see that clarity was never far, it was just buried beneath too much. The teachings of the Dhamma guide this way of living, not through rules, but through wisdom. Wisdom that sees craving as suffering, clinging as heaviness, excess as a barrier to truth. The middle path is not about extremes, it's about balance. Having what you need, and no more than what you can carry with peace. It's about moving through life without gathering unnecessary weight. There is no prize for holding on to what drains you, no reward for staying tangled in what no longer serves. The freedom you long for comes from the courage to release, to refine, to live with care. You stop measuring yourself by what's visible. You start tuning into what's felt. Peace becomes your new form of wealth, clarity your new kind of success, space your new kind of luxury. And from this place, generosity blooms, because you are no longer trying to fill a hole inside you. You are full enough to give, to share without fear, to let others be without needing to possess. Your energy becomes focused, not scattered. Your life becomes aligned, not reactive. Your presence becomes a gift, not a performance. All of this begins when you choose less. Not from lack, but from deep, inner knowing. The knowing that in letting go, you are not losing. You are coming home. And as your breath softens and your mind grows quiet, allow this truth to settle in your bones. You are not what you own. You are not what you accumulate. You are the space beneath it all. Still, whole, free. And even when you've cleared the space around you, simplified your life, quieted the outer world, there's still one place left that holds weight, the mind. The deepest clutter isn't on your shelves. It lives in your self-image, in the silent, heavy expectations you carry about who you're supposed to be. The most exhausting things we hold on to aren't objects or plans. They're identities, roles, beliefs about how life should be and how we should show up in it. Thoughts like, I should be stronger by now, I should be more successful, I should be happier, I should always know what to do. These shoulds aren't harmless. They wrap themselves around your mind like armor that gets heavier with time. They whisper that you're not enough unless you're constantly becoming something better. They convince you that peace is something you'll earn, not something you already have access to. And yet, what's most painful about should isn't just the pressure, it's the way it turns the present moment into a problem. Every breath becomes insufficient. Every quiet becomes guilt. Every pause becomes failure. This is what happens when your identity becomes rigid, when your self-narrative is so tightly defined that there's no space left to simply be. You wake up each day already in a race against your own expectations. You measure your worth by how closely your current self matches the version of you think you should be. The Buddha taught that clinging to identity is one of the deepest forms of suffering, because when you believe you are your story, every shift feels like loss, every failure feels like collapse. Every change threatens the person you think you need to be in order to be loved, respected, safe. But who wrote these rules? Where did these shoulds come from? They weren't born in silence. They were shaped by culture, by memory, by comparison, layered on over time until you forgot they were optional. Until you believed them so completely that you started treating them like facts. And yet, when you look closely, you start to see cracks in the story. Moments where your truth didn't match the narrative, feelings that didn't fit the role. A tug in your chest that said, there has to be another way to live. This is where mindfulness becomes powerful, not just as a practice, but as a path to freedom. Because mindfulness allows you to see your thoughts without becoming them. It lets you witness the shoulds arise without following them blindly. When a thought appears, I should be better at this by now, you learn to pause, to notice, to ask, who says? You begin to recognize that thoughts are not commands, that beliefs are not truths, that identities are not prisons unless you lock the door from the inside. As you stay present with what's actually happening, rather than comparing it to what should be, you soften. You stop resisting the moment and start relating to it. And from that relationship, peace grows. Letting go of should is not about becoming passive or careless. It's about stepping out of the war with yourself. It's about no longer seeing your growth as a constant correction, but as a natural unfolding. When you stop defining yourself by fixed roles, the strong one, the successful one, the kind one, you give yourself permission to be real, to be messy, to be fully alive. You no longer need to perform your worth. You simply return to it. And in that return, there's healing. Because so much of your pain wasn't from what happened, it was from what you told yourself should have happened instead. From the version of life you built in your head that never quite matched the life in front of you. This is where inner conflict fades. When you no longer argue with reality. When you see that you don't need to become anything in order to belong here, that your value isn't conditional, that your being is already enough, even without proving or perfecting. The mind resists this. It wants to hold on to a clear image of self. But clarity doesn't always come from definition. Sometimes it comes from dropping the labels altogether. From being willing to exist in between identities, in the openness of not knowing. The ideal self is always just out of reach. It's shaped by dreams and fears. It promises happiness but often delivers anxiety. Because the more you chase it, the more you feel like who you are now isn't good enough. But mindfulness invites you into the now, not as a place to fix, but as a place to meet yourself honestly. It reveals that peace doesn't come from reaching your ideal. It comes from letting go of the need to arrive. You begin to understand that who you are is not a fixed point. You are a process, a stream of experiences, a changing dance of body, thoughts, feelings, and consciousness. The more you try to freeze that into a solid self, the more tension you create. Freedom lives in fluidity, in letting yourself evolve without needing to match anyone's timeline, in allowing moments of confusion without turning them into failure, in being sad without needing to be the positive one, in being tired without thinking you're lazy. This is the practice of deep compassion, not the kind you offer to others while staying hard on yourself, the kind that looks at your own heart and says, "You don't need to be more than this to be worthy." That kind of compassion dissolves the shoulds. It sees the mind's demands and gently steps aside. It listens, not to argue, but to hold. And in that holding, old beliefs begin to lose their grip. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop needing to be impressive. You stop needing to be anyone other than who you are in this breath. And what rises in place of all that effort is relief. Not the relief of escape, but the relief of coming home, of finally allowing the moment to be enough, of letting the inner critic rest, of no longer needing to earn your place. As you walk this path, you start to notice how often others are caught in the same trap. You see their shoulds, their self-judgment, their quiet war against their own becoming. And instead of reacting, you soften toward them too. Because the more you let go of your own rigid identity, the more space you make for others to be human. The more deeply you live in acceptance, the more healing flows through your presence. You become less reactive, less defensive, less interested in being right or seen or approved. Not because you don't care, but because your peace no longer depends on it. Your identity stops being a wall and becomes a window. You can still grow, still evolve, but now your growth is rooted in love, not shame, in curiosity, not self-hatred. You expand not to become worthy, but because it feels like truth. There's no longer a pressure to match a perfect version of yourself, just a desire to live honestly, to move with integrity, to act in alignment with your deepest values, not your loudest fears. And in the moments where should returns as it will, you meet it with awareness. You don't push it away, you don't judge it, you just see it clearly and respond with care. That's how healing happens. Not all at once, but breath by breath, not by erasing the mind's stories, but by no longer believing them so blindly. Eventually, your identity becomes light, flexible, a set of clothes you can change, not a skin you're trapped inside. You hold it all loosely, the roles, the goals, the names. You know they're useful, but not ultimate. You no longer confuse the mask for the face. You no longer confuse your thoughts with truth. You no longer confuse becoming with worthiness. And in that clarity, peace settles in your chest like a deep exhale. You feel more yourself, not because you've perfected the image, but because you've released the need to have one. Now you can rest, fully, softly, without needing to be anyone else. You're no longer chasing the person you think you should be. You're finally at ease with who you are. And once the burden of being someone in particular starts to fall away, something else begins to surface. A subtle but dangerous pull toward overcorrection, the tendency to swing from one extreme to another, from chasing success to rejecting it, from over-identifying with roles to pushing them all away, from being too much to being not enough. Even the act of letting go can turn into something we cling to. When we release one identity, one way of life, one set of beliefs, the mind often reaches for the opposite, as if peace can only be found in doing the exact opposite of what hurt us. But that too becomes a form of attachment, a quieter one, a more noble one maybe, but still tight, still rigid, still another version of the same suffering, just wearing different clothes. Even on the spiritual path, it's easy to become attached to the idea of awakening, to strict practices, to being the good meditator, to rejecting comfort as a sign of weakness, to the belief that more effort always means more growth, that pushing harder makes us more pure. And yet, this striving, even when it wears the robes of self-discipline, can become another trap. The Buddha saw this clearly. Before his awakening, he practiced extreme self-denial, starvation, silence, harsh control. He stripped everything away in search of truth. But it didn't bring him peace. It only made his body weak and his mind clouded. He realized that clinging to extreme seven spiritual once was still clinging. That realization was the birth of the middle way. Not a path of comfort for its own sake, not indulgence, not laziness, but also not punishment, not constant struggle, not endless pushing. It is a path of balance, of steadiness, of staying present without swinging toward excess or deprivation. The middle way doesn't reject discipline, it refines it. It doesn't deny joy, it deepens it. It doesn't discard structure, it softens it, makes it flexible. It invites you to walk with awareness, with care, with gentleness toward yourself and the world. You begin to see that peace isn't found in extremes. It's found in staying close to what's true in this moment. And the truth is never extreme. It shifts, it breathes. It calls for listening, not for rules. One of the greatest risks on any path of growth is turning the path into another performance, another image to maintain, another identity to protect. You start fasting because it clears the mind, but soon you're clinging to the idea that eating less makes you more spiritual. You start meditating to rest the heart, but eventually find yourself judging every distraction as failure. You start living simply, but secretly start competing over who owns the least. This is how even the most beautiful practices can become another layer of attachment. The middle way reminds you to pause, to return, to ask, what's here, right now? Not, what should I be doing? Not, how can I reach the next level? But, is this rooted in wisdom or fear, in love or ego? Non-attachment to extremes means letting go of the belief that you have to suffer to grow. It means releasing the story that ease is weakness, that letting yourself rest is indulgence, that not pushing hard enough means you're falling behind. You begin to recognize that every extreme, even the ones praised by others, carries its own tension. And tension, when left unchecked, always leads back to suffering. The middle way doesn't mean you live in a gray zone of neutrality. It means you live awake to the pull of both sides. You notice when you're chasing intensity just to feel alive. You notice when you're avoiding discomfort out of fear. You stay close to center, not by being passive, but by being deeply aware. There's power in that awareness, power in choosing the gentle path, even when the world tells you to choose the loud one. Power in not reacting automatically to the pull of your habits. And this path is deeply personal. What feels balanced to one person may feel excessive to another. The point isn't to follow a formula, it's to cultivate sensitivity, to notice what opens your heart and what tightens it, to follow the thread of peace, not pressure. Non-attachment to extremes also applies to how we think. The mind loves all or nothing thinking, success or failure, good or bad, right or wrong. But wisdom lives in nuance. It lives in being able to hold contradictions, to say, this helped me once, but now it no longer fits, to allow space for change without shame. You start to unlearn the need for absolute certainty. You stop needing to be completely right or completely wrong. You accept that truth is often a moving thing, that growth is not a straight line, that healing doesn't always look noble, that rest is sometimes the bravest choice. This way of living creates depth, because now you're not avoiding life, you're meeting it fully, without filters, without clinging to how it should feel. without needing to label every moment as success or setback. You walk through pleasure and pain with the same presence, through clarity and confusion with the same breath, through praise and blame without chasing one or hiding from the other. And slowly, you start to feel more whole, not because you've perfected balance, but because you've stopped resisting it. You've stopped swinging so far in either direction that you forget the middle exists. There is a softness that grows when you no longer have to prove anything, when your worth isn't measured by how hard you try or how little you need, when you stop competing with your past self or future goals. Non-attachment to extremes lets you love yourself when you're tired. It lets you respect yourself when you say no. It lets you move through the world with a kind of quiet confidence, the kind that comes from control, but the kind that comes from harmony. This harmony extends to your relationships. You no longer need to be all things to all people. You stop swinging between isolation and overgiving. You stop needing others to agree with you in order to feel secure. You listen more. You argue less. You recognize that truth can be shared without being forced, that boundaries can exist without walls, that connection is not found in intensity, but in consistency. And just like that, the middle path isn't just a concept, it becomes your ground, the place you return to again and again. When life pulls too hard in one direction, it becomes your compass. There's nothing flashy about this way of living. It won't always be noticed, but it will be felt, in the way your nervous system settles, in the way your breath deepens, in the way your mind softens. You'll know you're on this path when peace stops being a goal and starts being your default, when you stop looking for signs that you're doing it right and start trusting how it feels. The mind may still reach for extremes. That's its nature. But now, you have a deeper intelligence guiding you, the part of you that remembers how balance feels, how clear the sky is after the storm of striving fades. You don't need to be the most disciplined, or the most surrendered, or the most enlightened. You just need to be honest enough to see when you're clinging again, brave enough to return to center. And that returning, that's the practice, not perfection, just returning, over and over, with patience, with care, with love. No extremes, no drama, just presence, just now. And as your thoughts settle, as your body softens, let this balance carry you. You've tried the edges, you've touched the high and low. Now, rest in the middle. Here is where you begin to remember the quiet power of enough. And when you begin to walk the path of balance, of letting go of extremes, of not needing life to be either perfect or broken, you arrive at a quieter truth that has always been there beneath every moment. That everything changes, that nothing, not even the most beautiful feeling or the most painful experience, can stay the same. And somehow, even knowing this, we still hold on. We hold on to people as if they won't change. We hold on to moments as if they'll freeze in time. We hold on to versions of ourselves that no longer exist. And when change inevitably arrives, it feels like loss, like betrayal, like something precious has been stolen. But what if the problem wasn't the change itself? What if the suffering came from pretending things could stay still? This is where the teaching of impermanence, anicca, becomes not just a concept, but a path to freedom. Anicca isn't abstract. It's not something you have to believe in. It's already happening, everywhere. Your breath rises and falls. Your thoughts appear and dissolve. Your body ages, second by second. Emotions bloom and fade. Nothing in your experience has ever stayed exactly the same, not even for a moment. Yet the mind resists this. It wants things to last. It wants to capture joy and keep it, to control pain and avoid it. It builds attachments based on the illusion of permanence. But what it holds onto is already slipping away. And that's where the clinging starts. Not out of greed, but out of fear. Fear of endings, fear of change, fear of disappearing with the things we love. But clinging doesn't stop change. It only adds suffering to something that was already going to pass. So the practice becomes learning to live in truth, to stop pretending that things are stable when they are not, to love without trying to own, to grieve without collapsing, to see clearly that everything we experience is in motion like waves moving through the ocean, never still, never separate from one another. One way to internalize impermanence is to begin observing it directly. You can sit with your breath and notice how each inhale disappears into an exhale, how the space between each breath is never quite the same, how your body moves even in stillness, how even the feeling of stillness shifts as you observe it. This kind of awareness isn't passive, it's precise. It tunes you into reality, not as an idea, but as a living process. You begin to see that emotions, no matter how intense, have a life cycle. That joy peaks and softens, that sadness rises and dissolves, that anger flares and cools. Nothing stays. And this is not meant to make you numb, it's meant to liberate you, because once you see the transient nature of experience, you stop building your identity on temporary states. You no longer say, "I am this anger," or "I am this pain," or even, "I am this joy." You start to say, "This is visiting me now, and it will pass." That shift changes everything. It allows you to sit with pain without fearing it will last forever. It allows you to enjoy pleasure without needing to possess it. It allows you to meet people as they are, without needing them to stay the same. You begin to relate to life as a series of moments, not a permanent structure. Each moment is new, alive, changing, and when you live like that, your heart stays open, because you're no longer demanding that anything last. You're just being present and allowing. Letting go of emotional clinging doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop gripping. You love fully, knowing that love will shift. You celebrate, knowing the celebration will end. You mourn, knowing the grief will soften. You participate in life without needing it to give you guarantees. This makes space for real compassion, because now you don't have to fix or hold on to anyone's story. You can be with others in their pain, knowing it won't define them. You can forgive, knowing people change. You can trust in the unfolding, even when it's uncertain. And in yourself, you can forgive your past. You can let go of guilt that no longer helps. You can stop carrying old identities like baggage you forgot to put down. Because now you see that even your most deeply held beliefs about who you are temporary. You are not the sadness you once felt. You are not the mistakes you once made. You are not bound to your history. You are changing, even now, softly, quietly, with every breath. There is also a deeper truth to impermanence. The things you fear losing were never truly yours. The people you love are not possessions. The experiences you cherish are not property. They passed through your life, touched you, moved you, and now they live in memory. And memory, too, shifts. This can feel heartbreaking at first, but over time, it becomes a kind of relief, because now you're no longer responsible for keeping the past alive. You're free to meet life where it is, instead of where it was. This creates a kind of emotional maturity. You stop needing people to stay the same in order to love them. You stop resenting change. You start to respect impermanence not as a thief, but as a teacher. And you begin to see the wisdom in transience, the way impermanence sharpens your appreciation, the way it draws your attention to what matters. Because now every sunrise feels like a gift. Every conversation feels more sacred. Every goodbye carries grace. Nothing is wasted when you know nothing will last. One powerful practice is to reflect regularly on the changing nature of all things. You might look at a photo from years ago and simply notice, I am no longer that person. You might revisit a place and feel how it has shifted. You might hold your breath and feel it dissolve. These small reflections plant seeds, seeds of letting go, seeds of insight. Over time, these seeds grow into wisdom, a wisdom that doesn't panic when life turns, a wisdom that doesn't freeze when things fall apart, a wisdom that knows, this too is passing. This truth can even hold you in grief. When someone you love changes or leaves, when something precious ends, the pain is real. But impermanence doesn't mean pain disappears. It means pain moves. It changes form. It softens if you let it. Clinging doesn't make love deeper. It makes love fearful. And love touched by fear always asks for more than it can hold. But love rooted in impermanence knows its own beauty. It doesn't need to last forever to be meaningful. It doesn't need to be controlled to be real. You begin to love without demand, to feel without resistance, to live without needing every chapter to be happy, because now you see the thread that runs through every chapter, presence. And presence, when it's clear, holds everything without clinging. And the more you live this way, the more you see the subtle places where clinging hides, in expectations, in nostalgia, in assumptions about how things should go. You start to notice how tight the body feels when you're resisting change, how soft it becomes when you accept it. This is where the body and mind begin to align. The body learns to release what the mind once held. The breath becomes a teacher, the heartbeat becomes a reminder. Each movement becomes a meditation on impermanence. You no longer fear change, you welcome it, because now you're not using life to build something fixed. You're walking with it, breathing with it, meeting each moment with open hands. And what grows in those open hands is not control. It's trust. Trust in your ability to meet whatever arises. Trust in your strength to hold joy and sorrow with equal grace. Trust in the rhythm of life to bring what's needed, not what's expected. This is not passive. It is deeply alive. It lets you feel everything, fully, without getting trapped, without needing to freeze time. Because now you see clearly, everything you tried to hold on to was already moving. Every experience was already fading. Every relationship was already shifting. And that's not failure. That's the nature of all things. So instead of fighting it, you soften toward it. Instead of clinging, you bow. And in that bow, you are not weak. You are finally free. Free to feel without drowning. Free to remember without grasping. Free to love without fear. Free to be here without needing anything to stay. Because now you know, the present moment is not permanent, but it is precious. And that's enough. That's more than enough. And once the truth of impermanence is felt, not just in theory, but in the heart, when you no longer expect people, feelings, or moments to stay unchanged, new question arises quietly from within. How do you love in a world where everything moves? How do you give yourself fully to others, knowing nothing lasts? How do you offer your heart without trying to trap time or demand return? This is where compassion begins to mature. It shifts from desire to presence, from clinging to offering, from needing someone to complete you, to allowing them to simply be. Love that depends on holding tightly is love built on fear, fear of loss, of abandonment, of change. But fear makes the heart narrow. It makes love conditional. It says, I'll love you as long as you stay the same, as long as you make me feel safe, as long as you choose me back. That's not compassion. That's possession wearing a softer name. The Buddha's teaching on meta-loving kindness is not about romantic drama or emotional dependence. It is a quiet, steady warmth extended to all beings, without exception. It does not ask for recognition or repayment. It does not attach to outcome. It wishes for the happiness of others, simply because they exist. And yet, metta is not distant or cold. It's not the absence of feeling. It is love purified of craving, love that doesn't need to hold anything to feel full, love that does not collapse when it is not returned, because metta arises from within, not from need, but from understanding. This kind of love feels unfamiliar at first. Most of us have been taught that loving deeply means needing deeply, that if we don't ache when someone leaves, we didn't love them enough. That intensity means sincerity. But real love is not intensity. Real love is consistency, spaciousness, clarity, a willingness to be present with someone without trying to control the story. You can love someone deeply without attaching your identity to them, without building your future around their presence, without making their choices about you. This does not make the love smaller. It makes it more stable, and it allows the other person to breathe. Love with attachment says, I need you to behave a certain way so I can feel secure. Metta says, may you be free even if your path leads you away from me. This kind of love is not easy, but it is freeing. It is what transforms love from a contract into a gift. In practice, it begins with noticing the expectations you place on the people you love. Whether spoken or silent, these expectations often carry conditions. If they care, they'll reach out. If they really love me, they'll change. If I matter, they'll stay. These thoughts don't create closeness. They create tension. They build walls. They confuse love with control. Letting go of these conditions doesn't mean you accept harm. It doesn't mean you allow yourself to be mistreated or forgotten. It means you recognize that you can care deeply for someone and still respect their freedom. That you can create space for them to grow in directions you didn't plan. That their journey is not yours to write. The most powerful form of love allows others to be themselves without shrinking to fit your needs or stretching beyond their limits. And in that same breath, it allows you to do the same. Metta does not dissolve healthy boundaries. It strengthens them, because when you love without clinging, you are no longer afraid to say no. You are no longer afraid to walk away if respect is missing. You are no longer shaped by someone else's emotions. You meet them where they are, not where you wish they'd be. And you do this not with bitterness, but with calm. The mind may resist. It may say, but this feels distant, like I don't care. But look closer, you do care. You care enough to stop making someone else responsible for your happiness. You care enough to stop demanding that their presence make up for your fear of being alone. This is how self-love and compassion for others begin to meet. You stop needing another person to fill the emptiness inside you because you've made space within yourself to hold your own emotions. You stop grasping for love as proof of worth because you know your worth is not up for debate. And from this place, love flows more easily, more honestly, more gently. You can say, I love you, without needing to hear it back. You can give attention without needing it returned in the same form. You can show up fully without checking how the other person is measuring your value. Because now, your love is not a negotiation, it is a reflection of your clarity. This does not make you passive in relationships. It makes you steady. It helps you see clearly when love is mutual and respectful, and when it's time to let go. It prevents you from staying in something that is hurting you, just because you once felt safe. Non-clinging love creates resilience. It allows your heart to open without fear of breaking. It teaches you to stay present, to appreciate what is here now, without demanding that it stay forever. And if it leaves, you grieve, you feel, but you do not collapse. Because you were never trying to own something that could never be owned. This also applies to those who are gone, to people who have passed, to relationships that have ended, to connections that faded. You can still love them, but now that love is free of weight, It doesn't trap you in memory. It honors what was, without needing to recreate it. You begin to love not because someone completes you, but because your heart is open. You begin to love not to be needed, but to be present. You begin to love without fear of losing, because your peace is not dependent on anyone staying. Metta, when practiced deeply, becomes a kind of refuge, a home you carry inside. A warmth that doesn't fade just because someone leaves or changes. It's not fragile because it isn't based on agreement. It's based on understanding that every being suffers, hopes, loves, and longs just like you. And when you see that, your love becomes vast. It includes strangers. It includes people who have hurt you. It includes yourself, especially when you forget everything you've just read. This is not softness that makes you weak. It is strength born from the absence of fear. You become someone who can hold others without needing to hold on to them. You can share joy without fear of its ending. You can sit in silence with someone and feel full. This is how compassion becomes unconditional, not because you're above human emotion, but because you are more present with it. You see that the attempt to possess love is what makes it disappear. That love grows in freedom, not in control. This kind of love doesn't need constant proof. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be explained. It is steady, like the ground beneath your feet, like the breath that keeps you alive without needing to be noticed. And in this steadiness, you find a new kind of security, not one built on promises, but on presence, not on labels, but on care, not on fear, but on truth. The more you rest in this kind of compassion, the less you feel lonely, even when you're alone. The less you chase affection, because you are no longer empty. The less you fear being forgotten, because you have remembered your own fullness. This does not mean you stop loving. It means you start loving more fully. It does not mean you disconnect. It means you stop confusing merging with connection. It does not mean you give less. It means you give freely. You begin to understand that love is not something you get. It's something you are. It's something you live. It's something you choose again and again, not because you have to, but because it's who you are becoming. A heart that no longer fears letting go is a heart that can truly hold. And as this night deepens and you soften into yourself, let this truth settle without effort. You can love without needing to possess. You can care without needing to control. You can give without needing to keep. You are safe to love freely. You are safe to let love move. You are safe because your peace is no longer in someone else's hands. And when love is finally freed from clinging, when it no longer wraps around another with fear, when it opens and softens instead of holding tight, something else begins to rise into view. The weight of what has already happened, the memories that tug at the mind, the echoes of past choices, old versions of yourself, moments you wish had gone differently. Even without realizing it, you're still holding on to what no longer exists, expecting it to give answers, identity, or closure. This is where suffering continues to hide not in what's happening, but in what has already passed. The past, as the Buddha taught, is a mental construct. What once existed is gone. It cannot be revisited, touched, or fixed. Yet the mind plays it again and again, hoping repetition will bring relief. It becomes attached to memories, as if they were still real, still alive, still able to be changed. Regret is the signal that something is being clung to. It often arises not because the past was painful, but because there's still a belief that it should have gone another way, that there was a better version, a different choice, a different you. And so the mind keeps revisiting it, layering new thoughts over old experiences, trying to reshape something that no longer exists. This is where the teaching of momentariness, kanikavada, becomes deeply important. It reveals that what we call a moment is not a fixed point in time. It is a rapid arising and passing. Everything form, feeling, perception, thought, consciousness arises and dissolves faster than we can hold. The past isn't behind you, it's already gone before you noticed it. Every thought, every feeling, every impression, every identity is constantly breaking down and reforming. There is no permanent piece of the past you can go back to. There is only memory, which is happening now. And memory is not fact. It is shaped by interpretation, emotion, and repetition. It shifts each time it is recalled. So what are we really holding on to when we hold on to the past? We're holding on to the story we built around what happened. The version that says, I was wrong, they were wrong, this should not have happened, I should have done more. But those stories are happening now. They are not the past. They are the present mind replaying images it believes are still relevant. Clinging to the past also shapes identity. You begin to say, this is who I am because of what happened. You become your trauma, your mistake, your history. But the truth is, the version of you that lived that moment is gone, just like the moment itself. There is no stable thread connecting then to now, only memory and belief. To see this clearly is to begin to free yourself. You start by noticing how the mind returns to certain memories again and again, the places it gets stuck, the emotions it repeats. Noticing doesn't mean suppressing. It means seeing the habit without getting caught in it. Here is the story again. That simple noticing creates space. You can begin to ask softly, what am I trying to resolve by going back? What do I think I'll find if I keep reviewing this? Often, the answer is validation, or control, or clarity. But those things don't come from the past. They come from meeting the present with honesty, from letting the past inform your wisdom, but not run your life. In Buddhist practice, we don't erase the past. We see through it. We bow to its lessons. We learn to carry memory lightly, not as a chain, but as a gentle thread, something we can touch without being bound to it. This changes your relationship with regret. You stop asking, how do I fix what can't be changed? And start asking, what have I learned? What can I carry forward? This is not denial. This is maturity. This is the mind waking up from its trance. Because while the past cannot be revisited, your relationship to it can always evolve. The story you tell yourself can soften, the tone can shift. You can look back and see not only what went wrong, but also what you survived. Not only the harm, but the healing. And when you see that clearly, you begin to forgive not as a favor to the past, but as a gift to the present. You release the grip. You allow what happened to be just that, something that happened. This includes forgiving yourself, which may be the hardest part, because when regret becomes part of your identity, letting it go can feel like letting go of your moral compass. But forgiveness doesn't mean what you did was right. It means you've stopped demanding punishment as the price of growth. Self-forgiveness is not indulgence. It is honesty, a recognition that the version of you who acted in the past was not the same person you are now, that you too were learning, that you did the best you could with the clarity you had, and that now your work is to live from greater clarity, not from guilt. Guilt that is carried beyond its lesson becomes ego. It turns into a story about how flawed you are. But the Dhamma is not interested in your guilt. It is interested in your awakening, in your ability to meet the present without distortion. Every moment you spend locked in the past is a moment you are not here, not seeing, not listening, not breathing. You are missing your life while staring at one that no longer exists. Letting go of the past also dissolves the illusion of time as a line. In deep awareness, you see that time is not a straight path from then to now to later. It is a collection of ever-unfolding moments, each one complete in itself. And when you live this way, You no longer seek resolution in the future. You no longer need closure from a person who won't return. You no longer wait for the perfect moment to feel free. You realize the only moment you can ever touch is this one. This realization doesn't make the past meaningless, it makes it sacred, because it taught you something, and now it has done its job. It can rest. To support this letting go, Buddhist practice invites reflection on impermanence, death, and the changing nature of self. Contemplating death doesn't create fear, it creates clarity. It helps you see that life is too short to carry old stories, that every breath is a chance to begin again. You can also work directly with the body. Notice where past memories show up as tightness, where regret sits as heaviness. Breathe into those places. Let the body tell the truth that the mind avoids. The truth that pain passes when you stop feeding it. There is no timeline for this release. There is only presence, returning again and again to what's here, to what is still alive, to what wants to be felt now not replayed, but acknowledged. This presence is your anchor, your temple, your freedom. And the more you return to it, the less you need the past to be different. The less you need your younger self to have known better. The less you need to make sense of everything, because you are no longer living backward, you are no longer trying to fix a shadow. You are here, with breath, with awareness, with enough space inside you to hold both memory and possibility, without being ruled by either. And in that space, you can finally rest, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer trying to resolve what cannot be undone. You are walking forward, not because you forgot the past, but because you've stopped trying to return to it. And the present, for the first time, feels like home. And once the past no longer defines you, once regret no longer shapes your choices, and the need to rewrite old stories begins to dissolve, another form of attachment quietly steps forward. The longing for what hasn't happened yet, the dreams not yet fulfilled, the craving for a better version of tomorrow. Not the memory of what was, but the pull of what could be. It's easy to miss because it often feels like motivation, like optimism, like vision. But beneath the surface, a constant reaching takes hold. A restless hunger for outcomes, achievements, relationships, status, stability. The mind says, "I'll be okay when," and suddenly, peace becomes a reward you never quite earn. This is the subtle weight of future fantasies. They begin early, with plans and hopes and goals that sound innocent enough. But over time, these thoughts become identities. You're no longer just walking forward, you're measuring every step by how close it gets you to your imagined ending. And when life doesn't match the picture, disappointment quietly builds. In the Dhamma, craving isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in beautiful places. It hides in hope, in plans, in ambition. These aren't problems by themselves. But when they turn into conditions for happiness, they begin to create suffering. The Buddha spoke not against effort, but against grasping. Wanting is not the issue, it's the mental tightness around that wanting. The belief that without what's next, what is here is not enough. That belief becomes a prison, and the more you believe it, the more you live for a future that never arrives. The mind clings to visions of the future the same way it clings to the past. It projects images, creates timelines, builds expectations. It rehearses success. It anticipates joy. And while that might feel inspiring, it also traps you in comparison. Every moment becomes a checkpoint. Every task becomes a means to an end. You stop living for the experience itself and start living for what you think it might bring. This future-focused thinking is not always obvious. It can look like daydreaming, or over-planning, or constantly working without rest. But inside, there's an anxious rhythm and urgency that keeps whispering, "Not yet, just a little further, just a little more." Meditation reveals this clearly. Sit still and notice how quickly the mind jumps ahead. What will I do after this? What comes tomorrow? What if things don't go the way I want? The mind creates entire realities that have not happened, and the body reacts as if they are already real. This is why Buddhist practice places so much emphasis on presence, not as a concept, but as a lived discipline. It teaches you to bring the mind back, to anchor it in the breath, in the body, in what can be touched and seen and heard right now. Letting go of the future doesn't mean abandoning all direction. It means loosening your grip. It means setting intentions without turning them into ultimatums, acting without chaining your peace to results. You begin to work from presence, not for reward. You begin to trust the process, not just the outcome. You stop needing every path to lead somewhere specific. You walk because the walking is enough. This creates a quiet freedom, the freedom to act without stress, to care without panic, to pursue without pressure. Because now, your sense of self is not tied to whether or not the future agrees with your plan. And this frees your energy. It softens your need to prove. It quiets the voice that says you're falling behind. You begin to see that the future is not a real place. It's a story in your head, a moving target, a collection of guesses based on memory and desire. When you stop living for it, you begin to live fully now. This shift does not mean letting go of dreams. It means no longer needing them to validate your worth. It means seeing clearly that fulfillment is not a place you arrive at, is a state of mind available now, if you stop resisting this moment. The practice is simple, but not easy. You notice the future thoughts arise. You see the craving for what's next, and you bring the attention back not with frustration, but with patience. You say to yourself, "This breath is enough." Over time, those words stop being a technique and start being true. You also begin to notice how much fear the future holds. Fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of missing out. These fears don't go away by controlling outcomes. They dissolve through presence. When you are fully here, the mind has no room to panic over what has not yet come. Fear fades when you stop feeding it with imaginary stories. Hope becomes softer, too, not something that pulls you out of the present, but something that walks beside you. Hope rooted in presence is resilient. Hope rooted in craving is fragile. Non-attachment to the future doesn't kill ambition. It purifies it. It asks, are you moving because it feels honest, or because you're scared to stand still? Are you growing because you're curious, or because you're terrified of staying the same? This clarity transforms ambition from pressure into purpose. You act because it feels aligned, not because you're trying to escape yourself. And when setbacks come, they will, you no longer see them as signs of failure. They are just part of the path, not obstacles, just turns in the road. You meet them with the same presence you bring to everything else. This is how you begin to trust life again. Not because you know what's coming, but because you no longer need to know. You stop trying to fast forward through difficulty. You stop waiting for the real life to begin. You stop thinking happiness lives on the other side of achievement. And instead, you begin to feel something newer, quiet contentment, even when things are uncertain, even when they're incomplete, even when you don't know what comes next. That contentment is the fruit of non-clinging. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. It just sits quietly in your chest, reminding you that this breath, this step, this moment is already whole. And you are already home. And when the chase for the future slows down, when the mind no longer spins in craving for what hasn't arrived, you start to face what's always been waiting in silence. The quiet truth that this too will end. Not just the plans, not just the hopes, but the breath itself, the body, the time you think you still have. What remains when the idea of later is taken away. This is not meant to create fear. It's meant to bring you closer to truth. A truth so often hidden that it begins to feel like taboo, but turning away from it doesn't protect you, it only dulls your life. The practice of Maranasati, or mindfulness of death, does the opposite. It brings life into full color by stripping away illusion. It cuts through distraction and surfaces what matters most. Contemplating death is not about darkness, it's about clarity. When you face impermanence not just as a theory, but as a reality waiting at your doorstep, something inside you wakes up. The mind stops postponing peace. The heart stops bargaining with time. The soul stops waiting for permission. You begin to ask questions differently. Instead of, "What do I want to do someday?" you start asking, "What will I regret if I don't do it now?" Instead of chasing more, you begin wondering what's actually worth keeping. Death contemplation brings urgency but not panic. It quiets the endless loop of postponement. Because once you've held the truth that everything you know will pass, the mind begins to release its grip on the non-essential. You may notice how much energy is spent avoiding this truth. Through constant activity, constant entertainment, endless goals. These are distractions from the reality that your time is not promised. Not in weeks, not in days, not even in the next moment. The practice asks you to look, not away, but directly at this. Not to become morbid, but to become free. Because when you deeply realize that everything you're attached to will end your possessions, your roles, your body, even your name, you stop confusing any of it for who you are. You begin to live lighter, not recklessly, but with reverence, not with fear, but with full presence. Because now, each moment is no longer a stepping stone to something better. It is the very heart of life itself. Meditation on death also loosens attachment because it removes the false sense of control. So much stress arises from trying to manage outcomes, avoid pain, secure permanence. But when you realize that even the body you care for so carefully will return to the earth, it humbles the mind. This humility is not defeat. It is the beginning of inner peace. You stop needing life to go your way. You stop demanding guarantees. You begin meeting reality as it is fragile, changing, wild, and precious. One of the most powerful parts of this practice is its ability to deepen compassion. When you remember that everyone around you will also die, every friend, every stranger, every person you love, and every person who frustrates you, you soften. The walls come down, grudges lose their power. Ego quiets. You begin to live with an open hand, not because you've given up, but because you understand how little can truly be held. You see that clinging to control, clinging to image, clinging to winning arguments, all of it begins to dissolve in the light of death. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it sacred. You pay attention more closely. You listen more fully. You stop leaving your joy for some other time. You find yourself savoring the taste of food, the sound of laughter, the stillness between tasks, not because they last, but because they don't. Death awareness doesn't take you out of life. It drops you deeper into it. And from here, your priorities shift. You stop investing in what doesn't align with your heart. You stop saying yes out of guilt. You stop clinging to people out of fear. You start making decisions from clarity, not confusion, not pressure, not habit. You recognize that most of what consumes your mind is not necessary, that much of what you chase you don't even truly want, that most attachments are reactions, not choices. And now you have the presence to choose differently. This clarity also helps with letting go of people and relationships that have already passed. Not with bitterness, but with grace. Death awareness shows that nothing ever truly belongs to you. You are only a witness, a participant in a dance that has always been moving. And in this movement, there is beauty. not in permanence, but in presence, not in having, but in meeting fully what's here before it leaves. The practice of Maranasati can be done in many forms: quiet reflection, repeating reminders, walking through a cemetery, looking at your hands and acknowledging they will not always move, feeling your breath and knowing one day it will stop. You do not do this to become sad. You do it to become awake. To stop living like time is infinite. To stop loving like there's always later. To stop postponing your joy for some perfect future that may never come. As you live with this awareness, your life takes on a different pace. Less urgency to prove, more space to feel, less pressure to become someone, more permission to simply be. You see that you were never meant to carry everything, that you were never meant to keep it all. That loss is not a failure of life, it is part of its rhythm, and learning to move with it is the path to peace. You begin to live with the kind of kindness that doesn't need recognition, the kind of wisdom that doesn't need applause, the kind of presence that doesn't depend on a perfect environment. This is what death teaches best, that love matters, that awareness matters, that the time you give to your inner life is never wasted. And when the time comes for endings, for change, for final goodbyes, you are less afraid. Not because you know what's next, but because you lived this life fully. You didn't wait. You didn't hold back. You walked awake. Letting go becomes less about effort and more about understanding. You are not trying to detach from life. You are letting go of what blocks you from living it with depth and truth. This letting go becomes a daily act, in breath, in silence, in choice. You stop looking for forever. You stop asking for guarantees. You simply keep showing up again and again with a heart that knows time is short and that makes it all the more beautiful. And as you rest now, with the rhythm of your breath and the stillness of your body, let this truth hold you gently. You are here, for now, and that is enough. And when you begin to see death not as an ending but as a mirror that reflects the impermanence in everything, you may start to notice an even deeper pattern hidden beneath all your choices, reactions, and fears. A pattern that isn't just about this life, but something older, something repeated. A cycle so subtle that it often feels normal, so familiar that it hides in plain sight. This is where the Dhamma points to something even more profound, the cycle of becoming, of birth and death, of attachment and reattachment, the cycle known as samsara. Samsara is not only about being born and dying in a literal sense. It is the cycle of habit, of reaction, of clinging, of becoming. It is the wheel that keeps turning because we keep feeding it with our cravings, our aversions, and our ignorance. Every time we react without awareness, every time we chase after or push away, we are spinning that wheel again, not just for lifetimes, but moment to moment. The Buddha did not teach about rebirth to provoke fear or fantasy. He pointed to it as a consequence of identification and attachment. He showed that so long as we cling whether to the idea of self, to feeling, to form, to consciousness, we remain caught in a cycle we cannot control. A cycle that does not liberate, but traps. At the center of samsara is ignorance, not seeing clearly the true nature of reality. This ignorance fuels craving, which in turn leads to becoming, and from becoming, new birth arises. Not just literal birth into another life, but mental birth into a new identity, a new thought, a new emotion. It happens constantly. You grasp at praise, and a self is born. You cling to anger, and a story is born. You chase pleasure, and a version of you begins again. That is rebirth. Every time you react to life from unawareness, the cycle repeats. Every time you refuse to let go, you plant the seeds for more becoming. Samsara is not somewhere else. It is right here, in the way we meet the world without understanding. This is why insight, or vipassana, is so vital. Vipassana means seeing things as they are, not as we want them to be, not as we fear them to be, but as they actually are. It is a practice of truth, rooted in moment-by-moment observation. You begin to watch your mind and body closely. You see how thoughts arise and vanish, how sensations come and go, how feelings swell and fade. You start to see that nothing lasts, that even the idea of a solid self is just a collection of movements, physical, emotional, mental. When you see this directly, the grip of attachment begins to weaken. You no longer hold as tightly to identity, to plans, to stories. You begin to soften into the truth of impermanence. And in that softening, you stop spinning the wheel. Vipassana is not about avoiding life. It's about stepping into it with full awareness. It teaches you to meet pain without aversion and pleasure without clinging. To walk through gain and loss, praise and blame, joy and grief with the same clear mind. You observe what arises. You don't react. And in that space between stimulus and response, freedom grows. The cycle of rebirth continues because we are not present, because we are reacting based on past conditioning, because we keep reaching for comfort, control, validation. But with insight, you start to interrupt that cycle. You see the craving rise. You don't feed it. You see the aversion stir. You don't fight it. You rest in awareness and allow things to come and go. Over time, that practice cuts through the roots of samsara. You no longer need the next thing to define you. You no longer need every feeling to turn into a drama. You no longer create identities around your experience. You begin to live more simply, more clearly, more lightly. This does not mean you disappear. It means you stop building yourself through grasping. You may still feel pain. You may still have preferences, but they don't own you. They don't define your reality. You respond with wisdom instead of habit, with calm instead of impulse. And when you live like this, your actions stop planting the seeds of more suffering. You begin to move through the world without leaving more craving behind. Your presence becomes cleaner. Your energy becomes steady. You start to unhook from the endless loop of becoming. This is what the Buddha called the end of suffering, not that pain stops existing, but that your relationship with it changes completely. You no longer feed it. You no longer make it personal. You see it, feel it, release it. That release, repeated again and again, becomes the path out of the cycle. Not a path of denial, but of awakening. You don't escape life, you wake up inside it. And that waking begins the process of liberation. Samsara is not just a theory, it is the lived experience of constantly becoming something in reaction to something else. But once you see it clearly, you begin to choose differently. Not from fear, not from grasping, but from insight. You choose to stay silent when anger arises, not out of suppression, but out of understanding. You choose to speak gently when pain wants to lash out. You choose to pause when craving pulls hard. These choices, though small, are seeds of freedom, and they grow. Over time, your inner world becomes less crowded, less urgent. You no longer need to always be someone, achieve something, prove yourself. You find rest in simply being aware, in just observing the play of life without losing yourself in it. This is what untangles the web, not knowledge, but seeing, not belief, but experience. You sit, you observe. You learn to watch the world pass through you without getting trapped in every thread. You stop spinning. You stop becoming. You start to feel what it means to just be. And from that being, compassion arises naturally. You see others caught in the same web, grasping, reacting, suffering, and you don't judge. You understand. You feel tenderness. You offer space, because you remember what it was like to be bound. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is love, without the poison of possession. It is care without conditions. It is seeing the humanity in everyone without needing them to reflect anything back to you. Vipassana deepens this love because it strips away illusion. It brings you face to face with what is real. And the more you live from what's real, the less you suffer, the less you cause harm, the less you spin. Eventually, the idea of self begins to loosen even more. You no longer need to protect a fixed identity. You no longer define yourself by your roles, your past, or your goals. You begin to experience life more like a flow, not a fixed form. This doesn't make you vanish, it makes you free. Free to act without attachment to outcome. Free to love without fear of loss. Free to speak truth without needing to control how it lands. And in that freedom, the cycle starts to dissolve. Not by force, not by resistance, but by understanding. Because what keeps samsara alive is not life itself. It's the way we meet it, with craving, with fear, with blindness. But once you meet life with awareness, the wheel slows, the clinging stops, the becoming fades, and in its place there is peace. A peace that doesn't need anything to continue. A peace that has nothing left to prove. A peace that is no longer part of the web. And as the cycle of becoming begins to dissolve, not through force, but through insight, something unexpected begins to reveal itself. Even as craving weakens and identity loosens, there's often one form of attachment that lingers more quietly than all the rest. Not to pleasure, not to status, not even to self-image, but to pain. To the past hurts that shaped us. To the stories of how we've been wronged. To the familiar weight of suffering we've carried for so long that it now feels like home. This is where the mind clings in its most subtle form, not to what feels good, but to what feels familiar. Not because we want to suffer, but because suffering gives us something to be, a reason, a narrative, a self. The Buddha saw this clearly, that beyond all the noise of craving and distraction, many people remain trapped in suffering not because they haven't had the chance to heal, but because they've grown attached to the identity that pain has given them. The story becomes a shield, a justification, a definition, and slowly the pain stops being something that happened and becomes someone you are. This attachment to suffering is not weakness. It is the mind trying to feel safe. It says, if I let go of this story, who will I be? And that question keeps the pain alive. It makes healing feel like a threat, not a possibility. We cling to our pain because it gives shape to the self, because it helps us feel seen, because it once protected us from harm. But what once protected can also imprison. The Buddha's teachings gently invite us to look deeper, not to erase what happened, not to deny the wounds, but to stop using them as the foundation of our identity. To begin seeing the difference between a story that helps us grow and one that keeps us stuck. The first step is noticing the story, the one you tell yourself over and over, the one that says, I was hurt, so I can't trust, or I was betrayed, so I can't open, or I failed once, so I'll always fail. These stories may feel true, but they are still stories. They are not who you are. They are not the present moment. When you identify with suffering, every part of life becomes filtered through that identity. Even joy is approached with caution. Even love is met with suspicion. Even rest feels undeserved. And so suffering continues, not just because of what was, but because of how the mind continues to relate to it now. This is why awareness is so powerful. When you begin to sit with what hurts without merging with it, the space between you and the pain begins to grow. You realize that the pain is not permanent, that it changes, that it speaks, but it is not the whole voice of your being. From this space, you begin to question, Am I still living in the wound, or am I allowing myself to move through it? The practice is not about forgetting. It is about releasing your need to use suffering as proof of who you are. You start to see how often your pain becomes a way to avoid growth, a way to resist responsibility, a way to feel safe in familiar discomfort. And you also begin to see how much compassion is needed, not just toward others, but toward yourself. Because the moment you stop blaming the world and start taking ownership of your healing, something powerful begins to shift. You no longer wait for the past to be undone. You no longer wait for apology or acknowledgement to feel whole. You begin to give yourself permission to be free. That freedom doesn't come from denying what happened. It comes from no longer using what happened to justify closing your heart, no longer needing pain to keep you alert, no longer holding on to sorrow because joy feels unfamiliar. The Dhamma teaches that all things arise and pass. That includes suffering. But when we hold on to it, when we rehearse it, when we feed it, when we make it our name, it stays. It stays not because it must, but because we keep inviting it back. To break this cycle, you practice turning toward the pain with clarity, not narrative. You feel what's there without building more around it. You learn to sit with the ache without turning it into an identity. And slowly, the mind stops needing it. You also begin to notice how often pain becomes a way to connect, how we bond through wounds, how we measure depth by shared hurt. There's nothing wrong with vulnerability, but pain is not the only thing that connects us. Joy does too, presence does too, but we must be willing to step out of the shadows of our stories to feel that. This doesn't mean healing is linear. It doesn't mean the pain disappears overnight. But it does mean you stop organizing your life around it. You begin to see that healing is not about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before the story took over. And sometimes, pain becomes a badge, a way to signal depth, to feel special, to explain why you don't try. But the truth is, your worth is not measured by your struggle. You don't need to suffer to deserve love. You don't need to stay broken to be seen. When the attachment to suffering loosens, lightness returns. You find yourself laughing more, trusting again, taking risks without expecting disaster. Not because life is suddenly perfect, but because you no longer expect it to keep repeating the past. This is the heart of freedom, not that you never feel pain again, but that you no longer use pain to define your reality. You meet each moment fresh, without dragging the past into it. You meet yourself with softness, not shame. You may still carry scars, but scars are not wounds. They are reminders of your strength. They are not chains unless you wrap yourself in them. And in this way, the Dharma becomes not just philosophy, but a path home. Home to the part of you that never needed to be protected by suffering. Home to the awareness that sees clearly, feels deeply, and chooses peace again and again. You begin to understand that letting go of pain is not betrayal. It is not forgetting. It is choosing not to suffer twice. It is choosing to live now, not then. And the more you live now, the less you need the old story, the less you need to repeat it, the more space you make for something new to grow. That space is where peace lives, and it's always been yours. And once the grip of suffering begins to loosen us, the old stories lose their power to define who you are. What remains is something even more fundamental. A question that sits beneath all your thoughts, feelings, and identities. A question that whispers not about what you've been through, but about who or what is experiencing it all. The deeper you look, the more you realize how hard the mind tries to find something solid in the middle of it all. A self to protect, a self to explain, a self to hold together. But is that self actually there? The Buddha taught that what we call self is not a single permanent entity. It is a process. a constantly shifting arrangement of parts. This process is made of 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These are known as the skandhas, and they are what we cling to when we say, "This is me." But none of these parts are fixed, none of them stay, and none of them, on their own or together, can rightly be called a true self. Form is the body, the physical matter. It changes from the moment we are born. It ages, breaks down, heals, decays. It responds to environment and time, to food, to illness, to rest. And yet we often say, "This is my body," as if it is who we are. But the body shifts every second. Cells die and regenerate, muscles weaken and grow, bones change shape. What in it can be owned? Sensation is the second aggregate, the raw data of experience. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. We feel hunger, we feel tension, we feel warmth. Sensations arise and fade constantly. You cannot hold on to a feeling. It's there, and then it's not. And yet when sensations become strong, the mind clings. It says, "I feel pain, so I am pain." But sensation doesn't last. It doesn't have personality. It's not personal. Perception is how the mind labels experience. Seeing a shape and calling it tree, hearing a sound and identifying it as music or noise. It's fast, automatic. It helps us navigate the world. But perception is not truth. It's filtered by memory, emotion, bias, and it changes. What once seemed beautiful may seem dull now. What once triggered fear may now feel safe. Perception depends on context, not essence. Mental formations include thoughts, emotions, reactions, intentions. These are the stories and habits that build your inner life. They shape how you respond, how you choose, how you plan. But they, too, are not stable. A thought that feels important in one moment can dissolve the next. An emotion can rise like fire and cool into stillness. Mental formations are built by causes and conditions. They are not you. They are patterns playing out. Consciousness is the 5th aggregate. It is awareness itself, the knowing of experience. It is not content, but the presence of knowing. Consciousness depends on contact. There is eye consciousness when there is form to see. There is ear consciousness when there is sound to hear. But there is no unified, constant observer behind it all. It is a process, not a person. Together, these 5 aggregates make up what we often call a person. But none of them are fixed. None of them last. None of them exist independently. They arise from conditions, and they pass. To cling to them is to cling to mist and call it stone. This is what creates the illusion of self. Not something evil or wrong, but simply a misunderstanding, a deeply conditioned habit of mind. We say "I" because it's convenient, but beneath that word there is no solid center. And yet we cling. We cling to appearance, trying to preserve youth. We cling to emotion, trying to stay happy. We cling to thought, believing that what the mind says is true. We cling to preferences, memories, judgments, and all the while, the parts keep shifting. This clinging creates fear, because what is unstable must be protected. We fear death not just because life ends, but because we think the self ends. We fear rejection because we think the self is being erased. But there was never a permanent self to begin with. Seeing this clearly begins to dissolve fear at the root. It is not that you disappear, it's that you realize you were never as fixed as you thought. You are the sky, not the weather. The awareness, not the contents of awareness. This insight doesn't make you disconnected, it makes you free. You can meet each moment freshly, without dragging identity into it. You don't have to defend a fixed personality. You don't have to be the same every day. You don't have to hold on to roles that no longer fit. You stop building a self from what you like or dislike, You stop needing people to mirror your identity. You stop attaching to praise or criticism because neither defines you. You stop reacting from ego because ego is no longer the center. And you begin to feel a kind of peace that is not tied to certainty. A peace that comes from no longer trying to hold yourself together. A peace that allows you to flow, to shift, to rest. This insight also transforms relationships. When you don't cling to identity, you don't force others to cling to theirs. You allow change. You forgive more easily. You don't expect anyone to be your reflection. You meet people as they are, not as you wish they were. Vipassana helps cultivate this understanding. When you observe the aggregates closely, you begin to see how they work together, how they rise and fall. You begin to disidentify from them, not with rejection, but with wisdom. You respect the mind and body, but you no longer confuse them with your core. This disidentification allows compassion to grow, because without ego at the center, you become more available, less defensive, less easily hurt, more open to the truth of others, more ready to help without needing credit. You may still say I and me. You may still function in the world. But now, those words are tools, not prisons. They are labels of convenience, not chains of identity. The mind might resist this. It may say, if there's no self, what's the point? But the point is not in disappearing. The point is in no longer suffering from the illusion of control. The point is in responding to life without the burden of self-concern, without the constant performance, without the fear of being nobody. Because when the need to be someone fades, the space to be everything opens. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy with life. You see more clearly. You feel more deeply. You experience more fully because you are not distracted by defending a self that isn't there. Each of the 5 aggregates continues. The body still lives, sensations still arise, thoughts still come, but they are seen for what they are: processes, not identities. And when this becomes embodied, not just understood, but lived, there is a deep relaxation in the heart, a dropping away of effort, a trust in the flow of experience. This trust becomes your new foundation, not the unstable identity of form, feeling, or thought, but the openness that remains when grasping ends. From here, everything changes, and yet you remain steady, not because you are holding tight, but because there is nothing left to hold. Only freedom, only now, only the clarity that sees and lets be. And when the illusion of self is seen clearly, when you no longer mistake passing thoughts, sensations, and stories for something solid, you begin to approach life from a place that isn't built on fear or validation. You begin to act not because it adds to your image, but because it arises from truth. And yet even then, a new challenge appears. How do you live with purpose and care without falling back into the trap of needing to control what happens next? This is where karma meets detachment. So often, karma is misunderstood as some cosmic reward system. Do good, and good things happen. Do wrong, and life will punish you. But in the Buddha's teaching, karma is not about punishment or prizes. It's about cause and effect. Every intention you plant, every choice made with awareness or without it, creates a ripple. Karma is that ripple. Not what comes to you, but what flows from you. The challenge comes when you tie your sense of success or goodness to the results of those actions. You do something kind and expect gratitude. You work hard and expect recognition. You speak truth and expect change. And when those expectations aren't met, suffering returns. But when the self is no longer your center, something changes. You start acting from a different source, from needing results, but from alignment, from integrity, from wisdom. This means doing what is right, even when it brings no reward. Showing up fully, even when no one is watching. Speaking truth, even when it's not convenient. The action becomes its own meaning. You stop measuring your value by what you get in return. You act cleanly, without the weight of expectation. This is karma without attachment. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care in a way that is unconditional. You care because care is your nature, not because you are chasing a result. This allows your energy to flow freely without becoming tangled in control. Craving results turns even the purest intentions into stress. You plan a kind gesture, but you hope it changes how someone sees you. You help someone, but feel upset when they don't acknowledge it. You speak up, but get disappointed when no one listens. The disappointment isn't from the action, it's from the clinging. When you remove the craving, the action becomes light. You plant seeds and release the outcome. You give without grasping. You lead without controlling. You serve without calculating. This isn't passive living. It is powerful, because your focus shifts from outcome to intention, from what happens after to the quality of presence you bring now. The Buddha taught that intention is the heart of karma. A wholesome mind creates wholesome results, not always in the external world, but always in your inner world. A mind free from greed, hatred, and delusion generates peace, no matter what the world reflects back. This means you can act with strength, clarity, and passion and still remain at ease, because your peace is rooted in your alignment, not in other people's reactions. This also allows you to face failure without collapse, because failure no longer defines your worth. It is simply a turn in the road, a shift in conditions. You learn, you adjust, you continue, without shame, without losing your footing. This clarity sharpens your discernment. You no longer act just to be busy or impressive. You choose actions that are skillful, that support well-being, that reflect your deepest values. And you do so not because of what they might bring, but because they are what feel right now. This opens space for ethical living. You no longer need to manipulate, exaggerate, or compete. You don't cut corners to get ahead. You don't pretend to be someone else to win approval. You live transparently because you're not trying to create a result. You're just being honest. This kind of integrity is rare. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition, but it builds a kind of quiet confidence that no outcome can take away. You begin to trust yourself not because everything works out, but because you know you're living with awareness. This also softens your relationships. When you don't act to gain something, people feel it. Your kindness becomes safe. Your help doesn't come with strings. Your presence doesn't seek validation. And this builds trust deeper than anything that results-based behavior can offer. This way of living also supports sustainability. When your motivation isn't tied to outcome, you don't burn out. You're not chasing high after high. You're not crushed by every setback. You move from steadiness, not urgency. You are fueled by meaning, not need. Karma without attachment also helps you accept change. You may give your best and still not get the result you wanted, but now that's okay. You know that effort is never wasted. That inner alignment always leaves a mark even if no one else sees it. You become less reactive to praise and blame. You don't lose yourself in success. You don't shrink in criticism. You meet both with the same groundedness. Because your identity is no longer built on what others reflect back to you. You also begin to let go of the illusion of control. You understand that your actions influence reality, but they don't determine everything. There are countless conditions outside your reach. You stop fighting this. You work wisely with what you can touch, and you release the rest. Meditation deepens this understanding. When you sit in silence, you see how many thoughts are driven by wanting something to happen. You see the craving behind planning, judging, doubting. You begin to return to the simplicity of breath, to the completeness of the present moment. And from that place, action becomes clean, pure, not because it guarantees anything, but because it is a reflection of your clarity. You no longer ask, "What will this get me?" You ask, "Is this true to me?" That becomes your compass. You may still hope for things to unfold a certain way, but hope softens when it's not tied to identity, when it's held loosely, when it doesn't become a demand. You can still dream, still build, still strive, but without fear, without making the result your proof of value. This shift is what frees you. You stop living like life owes you something. You stop resenting what doesn't go your way. You stop measuring yourself by wins or losses. You act and you let go. And in that letting go, you discover something rare: peace in the middle of action, joy in the middle of effort, presence in the middle of uncertainty. You're no longer waiting for life to validate your path. You are your own validation. You live with integrity not because it pays, but because it feels true. You speak honestly, not because it wins people over, but because it reflects your heart. You show up fully not because it guarantees results, but because life is happening now. And now is the only place freedom exists. And when your actions begin to flow from clarity rather than outcome, when you no longer grasp for rewards or results, you start to notice another kind of craving. A subtle one. The need to be someone in particular. Not for the sake of the task, but for the image. Not for the truth of the action, but for the role it reinforces. Whether it's the reliable one, the smart one, the helper, the fixer, the strong one, the identity becomes as addictive as any external success. This is where attachment doesn't just follow behavior, it follows persona. You begin to wear your roles like armor. But over time, what once made you feel safe begins to feel heavy. Because the more tightly you hold on to being someone specific, the more pressure you feel to stay that way. Even goodness, when attached to, becomes a burden. You try so hard to be the kind one, the selfless one, the one who never complains, that you stop listening to your own needs. You feel guilty for setting boundaries. You smile through discomfort. You serve everyone until there's nothing left for yourself, but still believe you should be able to give more. And when you can't, you feel like you've failed not just others, but who you thought you were supposed to be. The problem is not kindness, it's identification. When you become attached to the idea of being the good one, it stops being compassion and starts being performance. You act not from presence, but from pressure. And the cost is often your peace. This same trap appears in achievement. Being the competent one, the successful one, the one who gets it right, these can easily become cages. You feel unworthy if you slow down. You panic when you make mistakes. You lose touch with the part of you that exists beyond doing. Every moment becomes a test of whether you're still enough. And identity roles don't only come from within, they're reinforced by others' families, cultures, relationships. You're expected to play a part, to keep being who people believe you are. Any deviation can feel like betrayal, but the Dhamma offers a way through, not by rejecting who you've been, but by seeing it clearly, by recognizing that any role, no matter how positive, is still a concept. And when concepts are held too tightly, they create suffering. Mindfulness allows space between who you are and the roles you perform. It helps you see when you're acting from habit, when you're reacting from fear, and when you're genuinely present. You begin to ask not, "What should I be?" but "What is true right now?" This shift softens identity. You stop needing to be consistent in every situation. You stop defending an image. You allow yourself to be fluid, to change, to rest. You start to understand that who you are cannot be summed up by a single role. You are not just the helper or the leader or the quiet one. You are a living, breathing process, always moving. always responding, always becoming something new. Letting go of roles doesn't mean losing direction. It means regaining freedom. You can still lead, still support, still create, but now you're not doing it to prove anything. You're doing it because it aligns with the present, because it feels honest, not expected. This honesty makes relationships more real. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You stop managing others' expectations as if it's your full-time job. You become more transparent. You speak from your center, not your label. You also begin to meet others with less projection. You stop expecting people to stay who they've always been. You give them space to change, to fail, to surprise you. You let go of the script and start listening to the moment. This presence is powerful. It doesn't need to impress. It doesn't perform. It doesn't grip. It meets life freshly. Every role becomes something you use, not something you are. Mindfulness helps you recognize the moment a role takes over, when the achiever pushes too hard, when the pleaser says yes too quickly, when the expert talks instead of listens. You catch yourself not with judgment, but with awareness. You pause. You return. And in that return, there is relief. You no longer have to maintain an image. You no longer have to earn your worth. You already are. This kind of freedom cannot be found in accomplishment or approval. It can only be found in presence. Even spiritual roles can become traps. Being the mindful one, the wise one, the healed one, these can be as sticky as any worldly label. You feel pressure to never struggle, to never feel doubt, to always have the right answer. But the path is not about performing awakening. It's about living truthfully, even when it's messy, especially when it's messy. You don't need to be seen as awakened to walk the path. You don't need to be seen as strong to be strong. You don't need to always be consistent to be authentic. As you release these roles, the breath deepens, the mind softens, the body relaxes. You stop trying to be good. You start being real. This allows space for curiosity. You explore parts of yourself that were once hidden behind your roles. You allow new interests to arise. You let your inner world expand. And with this expansion, your energy returns. Because now, you're not using all of it to maintain an image. You're using it to be alive. This is how identity begins to open. Slowly, gently, not by force, but by awareness. You don't destroy the roles. You simply stop mistaking them for you. They become tools, not definitions, temporary, not essential. And through it all, you remain unchained, untouched by labels, anchored in truth. You are not what others expect. You are not the story you repeat. You are the awareness that sees through all of it. And that awareness is enough, always. And once the layers of identity begin to soften once, the pressure to keep playing roles fades. What remains is a kind of openness that feels both peaceful and unfamiliar. You begin to see how much of your energy has gone into managing how you appear, what you represent, and who others think you are. But even without those roles, the mind continues. It keeps building, naming, judging, explaining. Even in silence, it keeps talking. And here, a deeper form of release becomes necessary, not from roles, but from the constant narration within. This is where noble silence begins, not as simply the absence of talking, but as a radical shift in how we engage with experience. It is a space where we stop explaining ourselves, stop defending our opinions, stop adding commentary to every moment. It is a practice of letting the world be what it is without interruption, and of letting yourself be what you are without trying to turn it into something. We live in a culture of constant speech. Whether out loud or through devices, we are rarely without words. There is always something to say, post, prove, argue, or defend. The moment a thought arises, it's shared, and beneath all of it is often the desire to be heard, to be understood, to be seen. But silence offers something words cannot. It offers space. It offers clarity. It allows what is true to arise without being shaped by the need to perform. Noble silence is not just about external quiet. It is about quieting the impulse to narrate everything, to inject your opinions into every conversation, to fix discomfort with explanation, to make meaning through endless analysis. This silence creates a different kind of relationship with the mind. When you are not constantly feeding it with language, it begins to slow. Thoughts still come, but they don't hook as deeply. Judgments arise, but they fade more easily. You begin to witness the mind without becoming it. And from this witnessing, something rare emerges, peace that is not manufactured, but revealed. In noble silence, you also start to notice how often speech is used to reinforce identity. Every story you tell shapes who you think you are. Every opinion you share becomes another thread in the fabric of self. Every reaction you speak aloud makes it feel more real. But when you hold that reaction silently, even for a moment, you begin to question it. You ask, is this helpful? Is this true? Is this necessary? Silence becomes a filter through which wisdom can arise. This is why silence has always been honored in contemplative traditions, because it allows you to meet experience directly without shaping it through language. It invites a kind of presence that is deeper than explanation, a kind of understanding that does not depend on words. Practicing noble silence doesn't mean cutting yourself off. It means returning to simplicity, saying less but with more care, speaking only when it's useful, listening without planning your next sentence, being okay with pauses, gaps, and unspoken truths. This kind of speechlessness teaches humility. You learn that you don't always need to contribute. You don't always need to be right. You don't always need to fill space. There is dignity in restraint, power in holding silence. You also learn that some truths only arise when you're quiet long enough to hear them. Words can be distractions, even when well-intended. Sometimes, clarity waits behind the noise. Silence gives it room to surface. This practice can begin in small ways. Choosing not to reply right away, taking a pause before speaking, spending time each day without speaking, texting, or reading, sitting in stillness with no agenda. And over time, this silence deepens. You begin to see that the constant need to express is often rooted in fear. Fear of being forgotten, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being no one. But when you meet that fear with presence, you discover that being silent does not make you disappear. It helps you return. Return to what is simple, return to what is real, return to the breath, to the body, to the truth of the moment. This also helps soften arguments. Without the need to speak, many conflicts dissolve on their own. Without defensiveness, many misunderstandings lose their power. Silence becomes a doorway to peace, not because nothing is said, but because nothing unnecessary is said. You learn to let go of the last word, to stop seeking validation in reaction, to stop filling silence just to avoid yourself. And in that space, you meet the part of you that doesn't need to be explained. This is the heart of noble silence. Not just a pause in speech, but a pause in selfing, a rest from building and proving, a chance to simply be. When silence becomes intentional, it reveals the patterns of the mind. You begin to notice how often speech is about control, how often it's about being liked, admired, or believed. But when you let those impulses pass without acting on them, a deeper honesty emerges. You begin to speak less often, but with more kindness, more accuracy, more purpose. And you start to listen not just to others, but to yourself, to your breath, to the sound of wind, to the quiet beneath thinking. Silence becomes less about absence and more about presence. And when you speak again, it is with awareness. The words come from clarity, not reaction, from stillness, not habit. You don't talk to be someone. You speak because it's needed. This way of living also heals the nervous system. The pressure to constantly respond keeps the body tense. Silence invites release, a slowing down, a recalibration. Your energy returns to the core instead of scattering outward. Over time, this practice changes your relationship with communication entirely. You stop speaking to fill space. You begin speaking only when it adds value. You become more precise, more thoughtful, more attuned. And even when words are used, the silence behind them remains. You speak from stillness, not separation. You listen from presence, not expectation. This balance creates harmony not just within you, but in your relationships. You stop needing noise to feel connection. You stop needing constant conversation to feel close. You realize that some of the most meaningful moments happen in shared silence. Noble silence also reminds you that wisdom does not always speak. Some truths are too vast for language. Some insights arrive through stillness, not explanation. When the mind becomes quiet, it opens. And in that opening, you find a kind of knowing that has no words but says everything. And when you begin to taste the depth of true silence, just with your voice, but in your mind, something unexpected comes into focus. The moment the outer world quiets down, the inner noise that remains is easier to see. And part of that noise doesn't come from what's happening now, but from a version of you that lives elsewhere. The one that's always connected, the one that shares, scrolls, reacts, the one that exists online. Even in silence, that self lingers. In today's world, much of our identity is no longer lived, it's displayed. Not just in person, but through profiles, images, status updates, and curated opinions. We don't only experience life anymore, we document it. And the more we do, the more we begin to attach to the version of ourselves that lives in a digital space. From a Buddhist perspective, this digital self is yet another form of clinging. It is the attachment to appearance, to performance, to recognition. The more we feed it, the more real it begins to feel. But like all other identities, it is impermanent. It's a construction. It's a mirror of craving. Social media offers attention, but it also demands it. Every post seeks validation. Every comment shapes perception. Every like becomes a small hit of approval. But these moments are fleeting, and the high fades quickly, leaving a hunger for more. You may begin with the intention to connect, but quickly find yourself measuring worth through numbers, through shares, reach, and engagement, through how much others react, not how deeply you are living. This doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But it also reveals a modern challenge: how to live in a connected world without becoming consumed by it. How to remain present when so much of your attention is pulled into a space that never rests. The Buddha taught that craving leads to suffering, and digital craving is no exception. The craving to be seen, to be relevant, to not miss out. It keeps the mind spinning. It creates comparison. It stirs restlessness. And the comparison is endless. You begin to feel less than, not because you're lacking, but because someone else's highlight reel becomes your mirror. You compare your inside to someone else's outside. Their joy becomes your absence. Their success becomes your failure. But this comparison is based on illusion. What we see online is rarely the whole picture. It's a selection, a curation, a highlight, yet we believe it and suffer because of it. This kind of suffering is subtle. It doesn't shout. It hums quietly beneath the surface, draining your peace. You may not even notice it until you step away. until your mind stops chasing likes and your body starts to breathe again. Digital identities also reinforce ego. You become the role you play: clever, polished, interesting. But the pressure to maintain that persona grows heavy. You stop sharing what's real and start sharing what gets applause. And over time, you forget who you are without the screen. Mindfulness becomes essential here, not to demonize technology, but to illuminate its effect. You begin to ask, why am I posting this? What am I hoping to feel? What is missing in me that I think this reaction will fix? These questions don't require judgment. They require honesty. They require pausing long enough to see what's driving your action. The practice is simple, though not easy. Set boundaries, not because you're better without social media, but because you're clearer. Notice how often you check your phone out of habit, boredom, or discomfort. Observe how you feel before, during, and after engaging. You may begin to notice that most digital actions are not done with presence. They are reflexes, conditioned responses. And every time you engage without awareness, you feed an identity that isn't grounded in reality. This doesn't mean you disappear online. It means you stop using it to validate your existence. You stop chasing worth through visibility. You start treating digital space with the same care you give to your breath. Digital renunciation doesn't mean deleting everything. It means letting go of the grip. It means being willing to step away when your peace is being traded for approval. It means choosing presence over performance. This renunciation can look different for each person. For some, it means silence. For others, it means mindful sharing. For all, it means recognizing when digital noise replaces inner clarity. You may find that in the space where scrolling once lived, silence begins to expand. Where comparison once clouded your mind, gratitude begins to return. You reconnect not with what's trending, but with what's timeless. The Dhamma teaches that real freedom doesn't come from having more, it comes from needing less. And this includes needing less validation, less commentary, less digital echo. Freedom comes when you can sit without needing to be seen. It comes when your joy doesn't depend on a screen lighting up. It comes when your worth is no longer tangled in what others think. The more you return to silence, the more obvious the noise becomes. The more you rest in stillness, the less satisfying the performance feels. The more grounded you become, the less you crave being followed. You realize you're not here to be consumed. You're here to live. And living doesn't require a platform. It requires presence. Peace is not found in comments, notifications, or reach. It is found in the breath, the body, the moment. It is found in choosing truth over image. And the more you practice this, the lighter you become. You carry less, you chase less, you compare less. And in that space, you remember yourself again, not the version that needs to be curated, but the one that already is enough. Here, now, without an audience. And once the digital noise fades, you start to remember who you are beneath the clicks, the curated posts, and the constant need to be seen. What surfaces next is something quieter, but much more persistent. The pull, that internal urge to reach for something, not always loud, not always obvious, but steady. Whether it's for attention, food, comfort, distraction, or even peace itself, craving keeps moving beneath the surface of your awareness. And even after stepping back from the world, you'll find it still pulses in the mind, in the body, in the breath. This is where mindfulness of craving becomes the next step. Not eliminating craving through force, not indulging it automatically, but learning to see it, stay with it. Understand it in its most natural form, without acting on it and without needing it to disappear. The Buddha's core instructions for this work are found in the Satipatthana Sutta discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. Here, mindfulness is not used to judge or fight what arises in the mind. It's used to observe it directly, to become intimate with experience as it is, not as we wish it to be. Craving is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. It hides beneath almost everything: the craving for more, the craving to avoid, the craving to become, the craving to get rid of. It's not limited to objects or pleasures. It includes wanting relief from discomfort, wanting to escape boredom, wanting to feel worthy. But craving itself is not the enemy. The suffering comes not from its presence, but from our reactivity to it, from believing that the only way to be okay is to satisfy it, or that we must kill it to be free. The middle way offers a different path. Instead of reacting or repressing, we learn to watch, to allow craving to arise in the body and mind without grabbing it and without pushing it away. To see it like a wave: it builds, it peaks, and it passes. To practice this, we begin with the body. Notice where craving appears. It might come as restlessness in the legs, tightness in the chest, heat in the face, a subtle lean forward. Craving has a physical signature. The body shows it before the story becomes loud. You can pause and observe, what does this feel like? Not, why is this happening? Or, how do I stop it? Just, where is it? How is it moving? What does it want? Then bring attention to the mind. What thought is tied to this urge? Is it a memory, a fantasy, a fear of missing out, a sense of emptiness that needs filling? Label it gently: wanting, grasping, planning, hoping. Naming helps soften identification. And then breathe. Stay close to the sensation without acting on it. Let it swell. Let it contract. Let it dissolve. You are not controlling it, you are witnessing it. Over time, something shifts. You begin to see that craving is not permanent. It does not need to be satisfied to go away. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Just like a passing weather pattern, this realization is freedom. Because once you see craving for what it is, it loses power. Not immediately, but gradually. It no longer pulls you the same way. You can say, yes, this is here, without needing to feed it. This is not suppression. Suppression is pushing something down because you're afraid of it. Mindfulness is holding it in the light because you're willing to see. You may notice how often craving arises from small triggers: a smell, a sound, a glance, a memory, and how quickly the mind jumps from that to action. But with mindfulness, the space between trigger and response grows. You now have a choice. You can feel the tug without being pulled. This practice also helps reveal how craving creates the illusion of urgency. It whispers, now, you must have this. You won't be okay without it. But when you pause, even for a breath, the illusion begins to weaken. You see that the urgency is not truth, it's just sensation. You also start to notice the craving to be different, to be someone else, to be more healed, more mindful, more spiritual. Even on the path, craving wears many faces. But mindfulness doesn't judge craving for being there. It simply says, this too. Even the craving for awakening can be seen with gentleness, not clung to, not rejected, just seen. In this way, craving becomes your teacher. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is real. It shows you where the self is still being built, where attachment still lives, where illusion still holds power. The more you observe, the more subtle cravings reveal themselves, not just for things, but for identity, for being right, for being safe, for being admired. These are harder to see, but even they can be met with the same calm awareness. This is the beauty of the Satipatthana Sutta. It doesn't give complicated instructions, it gives space. Space to sit with what arises, space to be honest, space to come back to now, again and again. And as the practice deepens, you begin to realize that craving doesn't just arise in the presence of desire. It also shows up in aversion, the craving for things to stop, for discomfort to end, for people to change. So the same awareness is applied. Where is this felt? What thoughts accompany it? Can I hold it without acting? Not once, but again and again. This is the path of liberation, not through force, but through familiarity, not through resistance, but through clarity. You begin to see craving as energy, as movement, not as enemy, not as self, but as something passing through awareness. And you learn to let it pass, not because you pushed it away, but because you finally stopped chasing it. And in the space it leaves behind, peace begins to settle, not dramatic, not loud, but steady, trustable, alive. This peace is not from avoiding craving, it's from no longer needing it to define your action. You begin to live differently, eat differently, speak differently, not from discipline alone, but from knowing what it feels like to act from freedom. You become less reactive, less pulled, more still, more available. And in that stillness, life returns. Unfiltered, uncraved, unclung to, just present. And for the first time, that is enough. And when craving is seen clearly, when it no longer controls your choices or clouds your sight, what often remains is a more subtle form of desire. It feels noble, it sounds wise. It hides behind pure intentions and spiritual language, but it still tightens the heart. It still says, not yet. It still creates distance from this moment. This is the craving not for pleasure or approval, but for enlightenment itself. Of all attachments, this one is the most hidden, because it wears the robes of awakening. It speaks with the voice of effort, discipline, and sincerity. It appears as the longing to be free. But when closely observed, it carries the same energy as every other craving, the belief that peace lies somewhere else, that something more must happen before this moment is enough. This craving can begin with innocence, a glimpse of stillness, a taste of freedom, a moment of clarity. And then the mind says, yes, this is it. Now how do I hold on to this forever? That's when the grasping returns, not around objects or identity, but around a state. The Buddha warned about this final trap, the attachment to states of mind, the attachment to purity, to silence, to insight. Not because these things are wrong, but because clinging to them becomes the very thing that blocks the way forward. Wanting to awaken is not the same as being awake. The more you chase a final destination, the more you separate yourself from the path that leads there. Because awakening is not something to get, it's something to uncover. It does not belong to the future. It does not respond to pressure. When the mind grasps at spiritual attainment, it creates a subtle new self, a spiritual seeker, a disciplined one, a better version of who you used to be. But it's still a self. It's still made of comparison, of ambition, of becoming. And when things don't go as planned, when clarity fades, when doubt returns, when effort feels empty, mind reacts. I'm failing, I've lost it, I'm not there yet. These thoughts create suffering, not because truth is far, but because expectation clouds what's already here. The deeper truth is that no state can be held, no experience, no insight, no high can be frozen in place. The moment you try, it slips. That slipping is not failure, it's nature. Real freedom does not come from holding anything. It comes from letting go of even the desire to arrive. This doesn't mean giving up the path. It means walking without chasing, practicing without measuring, sitting without watching for signs of progress. When mindfulness matures, it learns to stay close to the breath without needing anything from it. It watches thoughts without grading them. It feels discomfort without asking for it to end. This same attitude must eventually be turned toward the idea of enlightenment itself. Because if you believe awakening will be a grand moment, a final shift, a permanent state, you may miss the countless invitations already offered by now. Liberation is not a peak experience. It is the absence of clinging in the middle of experience. It's not what you gain, it's what you stop needing. And yet, the mind loves goals. It loves measuring. It wants to mark the day it became wise. But wisdom does not announce itself. It unfolds quietly in the background as the mind learns to stop searching. Craving enlightenment can also create hierarchy. You begin comparing your practice to others, judging their words, your own progress, your perceived shortcomings. But none of that comparison is awareness. It's just the same old pattern, dressed in spiritual clothing. True practice is not about reaching a standard. It's about being fully intimate with reality as it is, even when it's ordinary, even when it's messy. Sometimes, the most advanced moment is the one where you admit you're tired, where you drop all effort and simply breathe, where you no longer need to fix, improve, or transcend. You just sit and notice. In those moments, the mind often quiets, not because you made it, but because you stopped chasing. This does not mean becoming passive. Effort is still part of the path, but it is effort without struggle, discipline without tension, devotion without demand. It is sitting because there is nowhere else to go, acting with care because there is nothing to prove, listening because there is nothing left to say. This kind of effort purifies the heart. It removes the subtle pride that comes from being on the path. It softens the desire to be seen as wise or serene. It allows practice to become invisible, integrated, alive. One of the hardest things to accept is that you cannot force awakening. You cannot push your way into insight. You can only create the conditions and let go. You can only keep showing up and releasing the grasp. When the mind relaxes its grip, clarity arises on its own. When craving falls away, truth reveals itself. Even the image of a final awakening, some perfect, unchanging state, must be questioned. Because life keeps moving, the body changes, emotions shift, memories surface, silence deepens. You do not become someone else. You return to what you've always been. What falls away is the idea that any of it needs to be different. The practice becomes cleaner, simpler, more honest. Not because you've figured it out, but because you've stopped needing to. And from that place, peace becomes accessible in every moment, even in struggle, even in silence, even in doubt. Because now, you no longer measure presence by how it feels. You measure it by how lightly you hold it. You stop reaching. You stop becoming. You start trusting. And the most surprising part is this. The peace you were seeking was never hidden. It was just covered by the need for something more. That need fades. And what remains is enough. Not perfect, not finished, but deeply, fully enough. That is the freedom the Buddha pointed to, not in special states or grand achievements, but in the letting go of what we never needed to carry. The final trap loses its hold, and you walk on, lighter, clearer, still practicing, but no longer trying to become anything at all. And once the path is no longer a pursuance, even the desire for awakening has been seen and released. What remains is a quiet space that no longer needs to grasp at anything, not even the most sacred goals. But in that space, one final form of longing often lingers beneath the surface, not for results or enlightenment, but for love. Not love in its open, boundless form, but love that is returned. Love that proves something, love that fills a place inside that still feels uncertain. This is where attachment wears its softest face, and where craving hides in the most tender place of all, the heart. This longing for emotional reciprocity can be difficult to see, especially when it feels justified. It is so deeply rooted in human nature to give and then wait, to open and then watch, to love and then hope. But that hope, when unchecked, becomes a form of clinging. A quiet contract we may not even realize we've written: I give you this part of myself, and in return, you will complete me. You will confirm I matter. The Buddha's teachings don't dismiss love. They clarify it. They reveal how easily it becomes conditional, transactional, or tangled in expectation. When love is used to validate identity, to soothe insecurity, or to gain reassurance, it becomes fragile. It becomes another link in the chain of suffering. And though the craving for love may seem gentle, its effects can be just as binding as any other form of attachment. There is a difference between loving and needing to be loved. The first is expansive, selfless, stable. The second, though deeply human, often creates suffering not because others withhold, but because we become dependent on their response for inner peace. We place our sense of being in their hands, waiting for a signal that we are enough. But that signal, even when given, is never permanent. Relationships change, people leave, words fade, affection wavers, and the mind, once soothed, begins to grasp again. It wonders, fears, reaches, not because love was wrong, but because the need for it to return made it a condition for happiness. To renounce emotional reciprocity does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming free. It means offering your care, your time, your truth, without bargaining for return. Not from indifference, but from fullness, from wholeness, from the deep understanding that you are already enough, with or without validation. This kind of love is not distant. It is fearless. It does not perform. It does not wait. It simply flows. And to love like this, you must first see where you don't, where the craving still lingers, where you give with subtle strings attached, where the mind whispers, I hope they notice, I hope they stay, I hope this means something. These whispers are not shameful, but they are useful to see, because seeing them breaks their hold. Mindfulness reveals the layers beneath your acts of love. It shows you whether your care is truly free or silently tied to outcome. It allows you to watch the heart without forcing it, without judging it. With compassion, you simply look, and the more you look, the more you can choose to love as a path, not a trade. This kind of giving does not exhaust you, because it's not trying to fill a void. It's not waiting for anything. It arises naturally from stillness, from knowing that your worth is not something anyone else can give or take. The practice here is not about turning off your emotions, it's about grounding them, so that when love flows through you, it doesn't leave you weaker, it leaves you clearer, it leaves you more present, because your happiness is no longer tied to someone else's behavior. This is not about closing your heart, it's about opening it wider, so wide that it includes others fully without needing them to reflect anything back, so wide that you can let them come and go, so wide that their response becomes secondary to your own intention. You begin to love more honestly, without pretense, without playing roles. You begin to see that love does not have to be symmetrical to be real, that sometimes the purest love is the one that expects nothing in return. From a Buddhist perspective, this is meta-loving kindness. It is love rooted in goodwill, not transaction. It is love that wants the happiness of others simply because they are alive, not because they see you, appreciate you, or need you. Practicing this form of love may challenge your ideas of fairness. The mind may protest, why should I keep giving if they don't care? But that question comes from scarcity. It comes from the belief that love is limited. that giving it without return means loss. But true love is not currency. It doesn't diminish with use. It grows in the giving. Still, this does not mean tolerating harm. Loving without needing return does not mean abandoning your well-being. It means loving clearly. It means choosing when and how to give, based on wisdom, not hope. It means walking away if needed, not because love ended, but because you no longer confuse it with dependence. This inner shift is freedom. You stop asking others to complete your sentence. You stop needing their reaction to prove your value. You love because it is your nature, not because it's your need. And when that love is returned, you receive it gratefully, but you no longer depend on it. It becomes a gift, not a requirement. This shift is not a rejection of intimacy. It is the foundation of deeper intimacy, because now you show up whole. You listen without defending. You offer without keeping score. You see others not as solutions, but as fellow travelers worthy of care, but not the source of your peace. The practice deepens as you reflect on the nature of relationships. How many have you clung to not for love, but for security? How many have you feared losing not for connection, but for what they said about you? These questions are not accusations, they are openings. They reveal the hidden cravings behind attachment, and in seeing them, you begin to unwind the knots. You start to ask different questions, not, do they love me back, but, is my heart open? Not, will this last? But, is this honest right now? Not, what will I get? But, what am I giving? These questions bring you back to center. They shift your focus from reaction to intention, from control to compassion, from craving to clarity. And as clarity deepens, so does trust. Trust in your ability to remain whole, even when others change. Trust in your ability to care without collapsing. Trust that love, when given freely, is never wasted, even if it goes unnoticed. You begin to walk through life lighter, more generous, not because you've figured out the perfect way to love, but because you've stopped needing love to be perfect. This way of living invites peace, a peace that doesn't depend on what anyone else says or does, a peace that comes from resting in your own heart, fully open, fully safe, fully enough. And in that space, love continues. Unbound, untraded, undiminished, simply present and deeply free. And after love has been untangled from need, when the heart learns to give without asking, to open without bargaining, what remains is often far subtler. Not the dramatic clinging to people or outcomes, but the quiet pull of preference, a subtle leaning, a quiet aversion, an invisible sorting of experience into what we want more of, what we wish would last, and what we'd rather avoid. These small pushes and pulls seem harmless, natural even, but beneath them lies the same structure of attachment, only softer, harder to notice, and more accepted by the world around us. Preferences shape nearly every moment. We favor warm over cold, silence over noise, praise over criticism, calm over chaos, and at first glance, these seem reasonable. But in the Buddhist view, even these subtle leanings can become the soil from which craving grows. Not because it's wrong to like certain things, but because when preferences go unnoticed, they quietly take control. A pleasant moment arises, and the mind begins to cling. An unpleasant one comes, and resistance follows instantly. We want what we like to stay, and we want what we dislike to go. That wanting becomes tension, even suffering, not because the experience itself is painful, but because we're unwilling to let it pass. This happens so quickly that most of the time, we don't even see it. We feel restless and assume something's wrong. We feel irritated and react automatically. We feel comfort and immediately try to protect it. These patterns become the architecture of how we relate to life, not as it is, but as we wish it would be. The Buddha pointed to this with precision. He described how feelings pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral lead to craving and aversion when unexamined. The moment a feeling is judged as good or bad, the mind begins to move. It doesn't stay present. It chases or it avoids. It leaves now behind. But what if we could stay? What if we could meet each moment, not by sorting it into categories, but by allowing it to unfold? This is the practice of non-reactive awareness, a way of meeting experience without needing to label, fix, resist, or chase. It begins by recognizing the presence of preference, by naming it, by seeing that even in stillness, the mind leans. When the breath is shallow and you wish it were deeper, when the room is noisy and you long for quiet, when a comment irritates you and you want to pull away. These are invitations not to correct the moment, but to understand your own habits. You can begin to watch for these subtle movements of the mind. Ask, what am I wanting right now? What am I resisting? Is there a preference shaping how I see this? And then pause. Not to suppress, not to indulge, but to witness, to let the preference be seen without being followed. In that pause, freedom becomes possible. You start to notice how often preferences arise without any real purpose. How often the mind moves toward comfort, even when discomfort holds more truth. How often it rejects what might offer insight, simply because it feels unfamiliar. The tyranny of preference is that it narrows your life. It says, only this is okay, and anything else becomes a problem. But life doesn't obey your preferences. It moves in its own rhythm, bringing what it brings. When you live by preference, you are always at odds with something. Freedom begins not when preference disappears, but when it no longer defines your response. You can feel discomfort without resisting it. You can feel attraction without needing to possess. You can feel boredom without needing to escape. You can sit in a moment just as it is, without dividing it into like or dislike. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you spacious. You respond, not from craving, but from clarity. This clarity also reveals how preference shapes identity. We say, I'm the kind of person who likes this, who doesn't like that. But these are just preferences we've practiced. They become identity only when we repeat them without awareness. When you stop clinging to preference, you also stop defending identity. You no longer need to be consistent with your past. You can change your mind. You can meet each experience on its own terms. This opens up the world. You begin to see that the discomfort you once rejected has something to teach you. That the silence you once craved may be filled with restlessness. That what you thought you liked may no longer nourish you. You become less rigid, more curious, less reactive, more receptive. This shift touches even the smallest actions. The food you eat, the way you walk, the way you sit with someone you disagree with. You begin to act not because it matches a preference, but because it feels aligned in this moment. And the less you cling, the more joy arises. Not the joy of preference being met, but the joy of not needing it to be. A joy that is available even in imperfection, even in noise, even in failure. You stop chasing the perfect moment. You stop avoiding the hard ones. You live more fully because you're no longer editing reality to match your taste. Mindfulness is the tool that makes this possible. It creates the space between sensation and reaction, between preference and habit. In that space, you discover you don't have to follow every urge. You can witness it, breathe with it, let it pass. The mind will still prefer. That's its nature. But you are not the mind. You are the awareness that sees the mind. And that awareness doesn't need preference to be at peace. It rests in what is. It trusts what arises. It opens to all of it. And in that openness, something simple